don't know if they've started yet, but let's have a look. Beginning shortly. Well, see about that and just see what happens, eh? Yep, still nothing happening yet. Well, I'll just leave it on there for a minute. Yes, well, shortly should be now, shouldn't it? Oh, oh look, there we go.
Good evening, Australia. Real Rukshan here with Avi Yemeni from Rebel News Australia. We are here with some of the candidates from the minor parties and independents who are running for the Senate in Victoria. We are running a debate between these candidates because the major mainstream media corporations will not do this. So a lot of you are wondering which parties and which independents to vote for from these freedom-friendly candidates and minor parties. And hopefully at the end of tonight, this will give you a really good idea on where they stand on certain issues and which order of preferences you may wish to vote for.
Absolutely, and it's interesting because they say that 29% of people are planning to vote minor or independent parties or candidates, and they pretend like it's those teal candidates. They pretend like these guys don't exist, and that's why we're forced to do this together. So thank you, Rukshan, for agreeing to take part in this and doing this and producing this together. And for those of you at home who are viewing this, share it far and wide. Let people know what these candidates stand for. And if you like what we're doing, head over to ausdecides.com and chuck in a few bucks to help cover the cost of covering this event. And I reckon we get straight into it.
Let's get straight into it.
Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. So the house rules, guys. Firstly, no social distancing. Cut it out. I know, Morgan, you wanted to stand behind the bar, but we're not having that tonight, all right? Phones off. This is a friendly, respectful debate. Nothing like what we saw on the rubbish on TV last night. None of that. The roles, Rukshan is the moderator, and I'm?
The agitator.
The agitator. There we go. 1 minute intro, you'll all get to start with. Who's happy to start the intros? Do we have? You're happy to start? Second, Morgan. David, third. Nick. Boom, and then we'll just go this way. You have a minute each to open up. We'll ask the questions. Each person gets a minute to answer them. If you want to interject in something somebody else says respectfully, just put your hand up. When they finish their minute, you'll get 30 seconds, and then they'll get another minute to respond to it. Moderators can interject anytime. That's the perks of being a moderator or agitator. At the end, each candidate, so there's going to be all those questions, then there's going to be one tough question to each candidate specifically designed by Rukshan, so don't blame me. And then you all can ask one other candidate one question. You don't have to, it's up to you. And then you get a 2-minute candidate closing. We're happy with that?
Yep. Sure.
Who's nervous? Anyone? No? No? Okay, good.
So,
me too.
Ralph, take it away.
All right, so my name is Ralph Babette. I'm the #1 Senate candidate for the United Australia Party. This year, the United Australia Party will run candidates in all 151 seats in the lower house and all available seats in the upper house. The United Australia Party stands on strong core principles and strong policies, some of which are a Bill of Rights to pay off our national debt, a 3% cap on interest rates, and to bring Australian super back home to grow Australia. Today, I hope that you consider the United Australia Party as your #1 for this election in 2022. Thank you very much.
Morgan.
It's great to be here. My name is Morgan Charles Jonas, running as an independent for the Senate. This has been a very long time coming for me. I've been working towards this for nearly 10 years now. I come from humble beginnings from a town called Emerald. I got to learn the land, and which is great experience, I think, for any person. My background experience is from the international trade arena, so my experience is supply chain management, dealing with customs, international transactions, and general supply chain management. I realise there's major problems in this country, and that it's up to me to step up and take a stand. I've been speaking out against government corruption for years now. This is not new to me, namely starting off in 2019, calling out Daniel Andrews for his dodgy and corrupt dealings with the Chinese Communist Party, moving on to COVID, standing up for our freedoms, every protest, every single step of the way. And I'm just here because I want Australia to take back its manufacturing, its dignity, and for freedom to be restored to our country. And David?
Hi, my name's David Limbrick. I'm the lead Senate candidate for the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats was founded in 2001. We were founded on the principles of liberty, and we see the principles of liberty as being not something that should be new to Australia, but is actually part of the history of Western civilization, you know, going back to John Stuart Mill and these sort of things. We feel that many people in this country have taken their liberties for granted for too long, and what we've seen over the last couple of years, something that we've always concerned ourselves about, the liberties being taken away from people, that has accelerated. And I believe that the people who value liberty the most are those that have lost it. Now that we're in a situation where so many Australians have lost their liberty, we think that there's an appetite for people in federal parliament to defend liberty, and that's what we stand for.
Damian.
Thanks, Rukshan. My name's Damian Richardson. I'm an independent Senate candidate. I'm standing up at this federal election because Australia is facing an absolute existential crisis that I cannot believe. It's extraordinary, the situation we find ourselves in. I cannot believe that I was locked up in my home for months and months and months on end. We were locked up more than any city in the entire world. We weren't even allowed to cross borders. I've talked to so many people that have had to suffer just the ignominy of being locked up, not being able to deal with family, people that were sick and dying in another state. They weren't allowed to do anything to assist to them. People that had gotten lost in a forest in Gippsland, a young child got lost in a forest in Gippsland, and the family weren't allowed to go and search for that child for being in breach of COVID, and the child died as a result. Where are we? What's happening in this culture? So I complained about it a lot. A lot of people complained about it, and I thought, rather than just complain about it, why don't I stand up and actually do something? Try and actually make a difference to the culture. And is there still hope to do that politically? And a lot of people would say there is no hope to do that politically. Well, I really hope they're wrong, and that's why I'm standing up at this election. I'm standing up to try and be a voice for change, and really just a pragmatic voice and a voice for reason. Since when have we become such a cruel and callous culture? We need to bring back our humanity, and that's why I'm standing as the independent for the Senate. So vote one for Damian Richardson at this coming election, May 21.
Chris?
Cheers, Rukshan. I'm Chris Burson. I'm running for the Australian Values Party in Victoria for the Senate. I have been obviously a policeman for the last 11 years, and I've been dealing with obviously people having breakdowns, families breaking up, people committing suicide and that sort of thing, and I've been on the other end of it, and all I've heard is people that are unable to do anything for themselves, and like Damian was saying, I was doing a lot of complaining. There was a lot of people at work complaining, saying, what can we do? There's nothing we can do about it. And I thought, well, this is the reason why nothing happens, because nobody puts their hand up for it. So after speaking with Heston, quit my job and have decided to run for politics. We believe in being able to try and bring in some policies that go for longer than just the next election term. Obviously, a Senate seat's 6 years, so instead of just going for the next election like the major parties seem to be doing, I'd like to bring something in that it might take 10 years for it to happen down the track. I might not even be there, but provided that it's, we've started that way, and if somebody else can take the mantle and finish, then that'd be great. Thank you.
Warren?
My name's Warren Pickering. I'm the primary Senate candidate for Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party in Victoria. My background is in defence as a combat engineer, also construction as a bricklayer and coal mining industry. Personally, I advocate for sovereignty of the individual and integrity of the Australian Constitution. For too long it's been abused now and misinterpreted, and we need to go back to its core value, and it's got to represent the Victorian and Australian people the way it previously has, and I think it can again. I think in doing so, we will reinstate Victorians' faith in political process, and that's something that's absolutely paramount right now. Myself and my party also believe that we need to risk mitigate against the agendas of globalist corporations like the WHO, WEF, who consciously try to impede on our democratic process in this country and dictate to us how we should evolve with our social and economic policy.
Nick?
First of all, thank you for having me here this evening. My name is Nick Clonaridis and I'm running for the Victorian Senate with the Informed Medical Options Party. A little bit about myself. I'm a former small business owner, had a small business in Frankston for 9 years. Last year I was stood down for not taking the COVID-19 vaccine. I was the state sales manager for the biggest garage door manufacturer in the country and lost my job. I've had every vaccine known to man, so for those who might jump out and go, oh, this bloke, is an anti-vaxxer, no, I'm not. It's just this one that I chose not to take. I and we believe at the Informed Medical Options Party that it is our right to choose, and that we should be making these informed decisions with our health professionals, with our family and our loved ones, and not having the government or businesses force us into making these decisions. The Australian federal government's immunisation handbook clearly states that no one should be taking any vaccines under undue pressure, coercion or manipulation, and it's been nothing but that.
Before we go on to the questions, I just want to firstly thank all the candidates for coming here tonight and agreeing to this debate. It shouldn't be something that the alternative media is doing. Some of you especially are now part of what is considered a major party. You should be on the main platforms, but here we are, and we appreciate each and every one of you. We're doing it in a pub, which I think is fitting with the beers, because it's really about the question, we're not like those politicians that are standing there having a beer for a photo. Does it pass the pub test? And Rukshan here is going to ask you the questions of policy, and then I will ask you those individual questions that Rukshan wrote.
I didn't write the questions. I wrote some of the questions. All right, first question, starting with David. You're standing as a candidate for the Senate on a freedom platform. You're definitely talking the talk, but how does the voter know you'll walk the walk if elected?
Thanks for the question, Rukshan. Look, I think in the case of the Liberal Democrats and what we've done over the last few years, it's very clear that we've been at the forefront of defence of liberties in Victoria. So, we were doing this before the pandemic. We were concerned with many of the things that the government was doing before the pandemic. When the pandemic came in, we were leading the opposition against the government. And we have a very clear view on what freedom actually means. Philosophically, we understand that freedom means freedom from coercion and freedom from aggression. And we have a clear role of what we think the functions of the state should be, that the appropriate function of the state is to prevent aggression and not interfere with the consensual interactions between adults. And that's what we believe, that's our philosophy, and that's why we can be trusted to defend liberty.
So the questions are going to go along the panel, and every question is going to start with the next person down. So everyone's going to get an opportunity to be the first to answer, so it's fair, and the last to answer for each question.
And if you need me to repeat a question, just ask. But Morgan, you're up.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Well, I think that actions speak louder than words. I consider that I've demonstrated by my actions both after COVID and before COVID that I'm willing to put my neck on the line physically to stand up for freedom. So I've been speaking out against government tyranny prior to COVID in relation to our government's very underhanded dealings with tyrannical foreign governments, namely the Chinese Communist Party. I've stuck my head out there. Once COVID hit, I quickly realised that we were being conned under the guise of a false health emergency. I've been out there protesting every step of the way, standing up for our rights. I've stood my ground knowing that I would be violently arrested by public order response, and that has happened on multiple occasions. This is the life that I'm choosing to live right now. Running as an independent, people can be sure that I'm not acting at the behest of any political party, solely what I truly believe in my heart to be of the interest of the public. It's my dream actually to stand up for my Australian brothers and sisters, and what motivates me is seeing all the pain, all the suffering, people's rights taken away. That is not the role of government. We are Australians, we're supposed to be sovereign people, we're capable of making our own decisions. The government has no business of trampling all over us, so I'm coming in because I'm seeking to scale the government back and to get our autonomy back on track. Thank you.
Ralph?
Well, the United Australia Party is a party of individuals. There's 151 of us in the lower house and someone there in every single available seat in the upper house, and every single one of us believes in freedom. But when we say freedom, we just don't mean freedom from Dan Andrews or freedom from COVID restrictions and things like this. We also mean freedom from high interest rates, freedom from not having a Bill of Rights, freedom from government becoming overly involved in our personal lives. We believe that the role of the government is to be there in the background, to get the basics right, and to allow every single individual in this country to pursue their dreams, life, liberty and happiness, so to speak. It's not their job to be involved in your life. It's their job to make you able to live your life easier. That's it. And every single United Australia Party candidate thinks the exact same way, and I can say that because I do know every single one of them. Having said that, I do believe that we do need to do something about the government overreach as far as the COVID restrictions go, and that's something that we will be fighting against should we be elected. One of our first orders of business is to bring in the Bill of Rights, like I mentioned before, which will outlaw lockdowns and outlaw mandates.
Damian?
What's the question again, Rukshan?
Sure. You're standing as a candidate for the Senate on a freedom platform. Mm-hmm. You're definitely talking the talk, but how does the voter know you'll walk the walk if elected?
Thanks, Rukshan. Well, I'd say they'd know I'd walk the walk if I was elected because I'm not a career politician. I'm doing this later on in life, and I'm doing it out of necessity, and I think the system has been absolutely gamed by career politicians, and it's not what the founding fathers meant, I can assure you, in 1901 when they federated this country. But it was just individuals sitting in Parliament, individuals that had done well in the culture and then thought they would give back to that culture. It's ultimately a service position, but it is no longer a service position, and it doesn't matter what side of the political fence you talk about, if it's the blue side or the red side. And I suggest it's not even a bi-party system, it's actually a uni-party. They're actually the same party, and they could mix the colours together. They could mix red and blue together and get purple. And what does that mean? Well, that's the colour of the AEC, and that's the bureaucracy that rules over the whole thing. And that's clearly what we've got here, a case of bureaucrats ruling over us, determining what we should do. They are acting with absolute impunity. They are actually acting with total freedom to treat us however they want. But freedom actually comes with responsibility, the responsibility and concern for your fellow citizens. We're a federation of peoples. We're an Australian peoples, and we deserve better than this. And I'm running because I'm going to stand up and make sure we get better than this, because I'm going to be a disruptive influence. That's my intention. Not a radical, but a disruptor, because that's what they need, because business, as usual, has got us to this point right now, and I've had enough.
Thank you, Damian. Chris?
Cheers, Rukshan. So I think that we'll be trying to get rid of the mandates straight away. You need to reinstate everybody that has currently been put out of their job, so we can get the 2,500 teachers back in, we can get all the nurses, we can get all the paramedics that have stood down, we can get all the cops that are on stress leave at the moment.
But did you hear the question though? What's the question?
Walk the walk.
Do you want to? Yeah. Do you want to?
So you're running for the Senate on a freedom platform. You're definitely talking the talk, but how does the voter know you'll walk the walk if elected?
I think initially I decided to stand up for Australia by signing up for the army. So I signed a blank cheque for the country for the first 10 years, or 9 years. Then I signed another cheque for Victoria to stand up for them for the next 11 years. So now I've quit that job because I didn't believe in where it was going and where the government was. And now I am currently unemployed with no income to pay for a mortgage until the election comes around, and then I'll probably be driving a truck afterwards because I can't go back to Victoria Police because of my last interview. So that's probably where I'd say the walk part comes in.
Warren?
Sorry, guys. So, as with all of the Victorian One Nation candidates and everybody at this panel, I'm running because I felt an inherent sense of moral obligation to my community. Having said that, I also represent a party who's synonymous with being outspoken in this country historically. And under the guidance of arguably the two most outspoken senators in Australia, Senators Hanson and Roberts, plus the weight of every Victorian voice behind the weight of every swing I throw in Canberra, I truly believe we can affect positive change for our communities.
And Nick?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the walking the walk I've demonstrated by walking away from an absolutely great job because of my health choice that I believe is my decision. Our party, the Informed Medical Options Party, has been around since 2016. So it's been a long time coming. Our party's founder, Michael O'Neill, is a bit of a visionary, and I think a lot of this started with the no jab, no play that was introduced with kids. The last couple of years has been nothing short of a disaster, locking down people, tearing families apart, destroying small businesses, people's careers. We're all for getting people back into the workforce, making it a priority for those who did lose their jobs, not to go back to exactly where they were from, because a lot of people won't be welcomed where they came back from, but to get them back into the industry.
Thank you. I'll move on to the second question, starting with Morgan. Where do you draw the line on freedom?
Freedom. As far as I'm concerned, Rukshan, there is no line on freedom. So our freedom is a right given by God. It's not given by government, and that is simply where it ends. What we've learned since the inception of this COVID-19 crisis is that we don't actually have protections for freedom in this country. We have human rights legislation, but when COVID kicked in, what we all found out is that it didn't do anything. We also have a constitution which is supposed to protect our freedom of travel between states. That didn't do anything either. So there absolutely is no line, and what I'm calling for, as strongly as I can, is a system of direct democracy whereby citizens can get involved in the election process. I consider that bills and laws should be ultimately decided by the citizens of this country, not a couple of people sitting in a crossbench of an upper house in some parliament in Australia. So I'm calling for direct democracy so citizens can get involved in bills to vote against bills that inhibit our freedom. And I consider we should have the right to citizen-initiated referenda and also the capability to instigate impeachment proceedings against sitting MPs who compromise our freedom. So freedom must lay with us, the people, all the time.
Just an interjection. So when you say there's no line in freedom, does that mean I'm free to kill Chris for his job in the last 11 years.
Well, that's not freedom. That's a violent offence, and you don't have the right to hurt anyone.
Okay, so I guess that's also part of the question. Where do you draw the line for freedom? Is it at a, criminal behaviour?
Absolutely.
I think it's important to clarify that here.
All right, so I stand against anything violent. I stand against anything that could hurt or influence children in a detrimental way. Of course, there's a code of conduct that we must all adhere to in society with consideration for each other. But when I'm talking about freedom in terms of how we live, how we earn a living, provided it's obviously not some type of criminal enterprise, what we choose to put in our body, that must also be a complete choice. The government has no right intervening on our bodily autonomy. So
it's fair to say, just to clarify for the viewer, you say there's no limits to freedom as long as there's no criminal crossing a criminal line.
As long as you're not hurting other people.
As long as you're not hurting.
As long as you're not hurting other people, because that's not freedom.
But what about walking around not unvaccinated and the experts tell us you're hurting other people?
Well, who chose the experts? Were they appointed by the government? See, this comes back to direct democracy. We should be voting in our chief health officer. It should not be a political appointment that's towing a bureaucratic line. Okay, so the data from the experts, well, where was the data? It was never released to the public. We all did our own research. We all studied the infection fatality rate of COVID-19. So if we're talking about big government, this is where I come back to the citizens must have the capability to intervene. We should be voting these bureaucrats in because they're political stooges.
Ralph, where do you draw the line on freedom?
Look, to me, freedom is the be-all and end-all. Like Morgan said, we draw the line at criminal activity, we draw the line at criminal behaviour, but everyone must be allowed to pursue their own dreams, their own lives, their own wishes, their own desires, which is why the UAP has at the very top of its list of things to achieve once we are elected into Parliament. God willing, we will be enacting a Bill of Rights to enshrine everybody's freedom into law that nobody can ever take away. No government in the future can ever take it away. That's what we wish to do. Freedom is very important. It's our core value, and it is what it is the ethos of the United Australia Party.
When you say that, as long as they're not breaching any criminal code, but if Parliament just makes everything criminal, which I've experienced, it's very easy for them. They want to. So how do we stop that?
In the Bill of Rights, we will enshrine in there certain core freedoms that nobody can ever take away. That can never be made criminal. You must never make the freedom of speech criminal in the Bill of Rights. The freedom of movement will be in the Bill of Rights. The freedom to choose your own medical treatments will be in the Bill of Rights, and that is how we will get around that.
Damian, where do you draw the line on freedom?
I feel like I answered that in the last question inadvertently. I'm one step ahead. No, because it becomes responsibility, and at the end of the day, we've been undermined as a culture and demoralised with identity politics. I was a sexist, racist, homophobe before I became an anti-vaxxer. And the problem with these things is, honestly, is habeas corpus. So we need the right to a fair trial. So if you're going to accuse me of something, I have a right to be charged with something. I need to know what that charge is, and you need to prove it beyond all reasonable doubt what it is that I've actually done wrong. Otherwise, I'm free to walk, because I'd rather one guilty man walk than someone sit in jail for something they hadn't done, because that just kills all of our liberty ultimately. And the reality, though, the difficulty with this is, who would trust the legal process at the moment? Who would trust it? I wouldn't trust it, because we're operating without any law at the moment. And we've seen that. They can do whatever they want to us. There's an elite cadre that can do whatever they want. We're still operating under an old morality. So these are really difficult questions for the culture, to be, to consider, and hopefully the federal parliament is a place we can do that from.
Chris?
So we have commitment to the rule of law is our line. So the drama is with the pandemic orders, with the state of emergency, that seems to have been a little bit confused, because it's taken out the parliamentary democracy, which is another one of our values. So if you can't have a proper elected bunch of rules that come in, then are they really legal anymore? In which case, are they actually the laws? In which case, they need to be debated. But that's where freedom of speech comes in, where you have the freedom to talk and the freedom to be offended. You can be as offended as you want by something that somebody said, but I don't feel like you should be able to shut them up. So if somebody comes out and they say something and then you tell them to be quiet, it goes underground. So that's how radicalism starts. That's how all these weird little movements underground come in, that sort of stuff. And then it becomes an echo chamber because they're not allowed to speak to anybody else. And then the people on the other side of it who don't know what's going on here, they have their own echo chamber, and then everyone comes out, and now we're all divided like we are now. So if everybody had freedom of speech, we could come out with stuff that offends people. You could then rebut that. We could then go backwards and forwards. You could have the medical advice where you go, these are the 10 doctors we spoke to. These are what they came up with. This is why we've made a decision. And then everybody could be on the same page and they can either agree, disagree, and then we can go back to the drawing board and see where we go with that. But yeah, commitment to the rule of law is where our line on freedom is.
How do you protect, though, stopping the government from shifting that rule of law, similar to what I asked Ralph?
So with, for example, how the state government came up with some pretend oversight committee, if you've got 3 people from Liberal and 3 people from Labor, you're never going to get up. You know, if you had, so for example, if you voted all of us in, for example, and then we were an oversight committee, it wouldn't matter if Labor or Liberal came up with it, because we don't have to side with either of them. So that way, at least there's an independent oversight, and then we're elected to be in there. And then it's the same with the Chief Medical Officer. If he doesn't have to answer to anybody, as in, well, he's answered to somebody, obviously, the people who voted him in, then the government can make the rules, but it's like they don't have ultimate power. So you need to have as many people in there, and the Governor-General should actually have a job that means that they can do something. Like, is that just a token position? Like, I don't know at the moment. So it's like people need to actually have their job and do their job as according to the Constitution.
Warren, where do you draw the line on freedom?
So I'd say so long as the freedom of expression of any individual or social group doesn't impede on the freedom of any individual or social group of others, I don't have a line on it. So freedom of choice, freedom to vocalise opinions, freedom for a political process. If a definition is required for an individual or a group to understand exactly what freedoms are and whether they're encroaching on another's freedoms or another group's freedoms, then we've already failed as a society. I think in this country we should all have a fair idea on what freedoms are and where those boundaries are. The reality is if people don't understand that in this day and age, then we have a problem with our education system, and I think it's very obvious that we need to revisit that.
But when you say that doesn't as long as it doesn't encroach on another, what do you mean by that? So if you're a minority and I, said something that was offensive...
Well, as was implied by the rest of the panel, that your freedom of opinion, you have, as was mentioned by Chris, you're entitled to your opinion.
Yeah, I'm asking, what did you mean by as long as you don't impede on somebody else's freedom of it?
Well, so long as you don't impede on their right to have an opinion or to share their opinion or to vocalise their opinion publicly or privately.
So you're allowed to speak as long as you're not telling someone else to shut up?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nick, where do you draw the line on freedom?
I think if we're being respectful to each other, because these days social media is a huge thing, so it's not just...
Let's just clarify, this is not about... we've got freedom of speech coming up. This is not just about freedom of speech. This is about freedom.
Sure.
In general.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you want to add something just in case that wasn't clear? No. Yeah.
Sure, as long as we're not breaking any laws and it is respectfully done. Like if, for an example, you look at the protests in Melbourne. Okay, so there's a lot of people going out every Saturday and protesting, very peaceful, going along, trying to make a point. Last time I checked, we live in Australia, and last time I checked, this is a democracy. So we have the right to do that. That is a right of ours. A democratic right to peacefully protest and make a point. Now, we can disagree with people. I can disagree with others. My father's vaccinated, to give you an example, and he disagrees with me and we have an argument, but we have a discussion. And that's okay. But once you're silenced and somebody says to you, your opinion is not valid because you're not going with the narrative, then that's wrong. And that's no longer freedom anymore.
David.
Yeah, I think I mentioned John Stuart Mill in my introduction, and I'll mention him again. He articulated this very clearly on Liberty back in the mid-1800s through the harm principle. And individuals, there's no moral basis for government to intervene with the voluntary actions of individuals who are not harming other people. And that harm can be in the form of physical harm, force, fraud, threats of force, or breaches of contract, these sort of things. We draw a clear distinction between the law and morality. In fact, most of the worst crimes in human history were totally legal. So we actually oppose many of the current laws and think that they should be removed, particularly laws which we classify as victimless crimes. So a crime where someone is hurting themselves. In a free society, people should be able to make choices even if it harms themselves. A classic one is, small amounts of drug possession. We think that that should be removed as a crime because it's not harming other people directly.
All right, Ralph.
David's done this before.
I live it.
He should be on a handicap or something.
Next question, starting with Ralph. If you got in and another crisis impacts the entire country, which the government says can only be managed via curtailing the freedoms again, what will you do?
I'll push back against that quite strongly. I don't believe it's the government's right to interject in anyone's life or anything of that nature, unless, of course, it is of a drastic nature. I'm talking something like wartime. If we're under direct military threat, something along those lines, you could make an argument that a curtailing of freedoms might be required. For example, in World War II, they would turn off all the lights across Great Britain when the German bombers were going to come overhead, and that was a government mandate. That completely makes sense. So that's it would depend on the situation itself, on what I would do, but I would be very, very hard pressed to wish to remove freedoms from anyone at all across this country.
Who decides that? Who defines that? Because, in the beginning of this pandemic, we were told we are at war with an invisible enemy.
Yep. So that would obviously be decided by the Australian people. Going back to before how I mentioned we would have a Bill of Rights, one of the first things that we'd do if it were to be elected, the people would have the right to speak at all times. They would have the right to peacefully assemble, and us as a UAP government, if that was the wish of the people, we would listen.
And obviously you're the first to answer this question, so to be fair, when we're talking about what are you going to do, we're talking about on a practical, pushing back's great. How are you going to push back? What would you do?
Once again, it depends on the situation. So it's hard to answer a question like that unless I have an actual example of what's going on right there.
There's a new variant.
The new variant, I think we all know what the answer would be there. I would tell them to go and get stuff and everything would be open as per normal, obviously. So I would make that decision from a place of wishing freedom on every single Australian, from a place of having just put through a Bill of Rights if I'm elected, if the team is elected into Parliament. So all decisions will go back to that.
Damian, what would you do?
Well, I just want open and transparent decision-making from the bureaucracy. So if you're telling me we need to respond to some hidden virus, like you're saying, in some particular way, show me the data. Show me the science. I'm capable, I'm a mature adult of making my own decisions and choices around it. And that's not what was done in the last situation, was it? So I could go to a McDonald's in Canberra and that was fine, but I needed to be vaccinated to enter a McDonald's in Melbourne. And that was the science. What science is that exactly? I'd like to know. So be open and transparent with why you're making those decisions, why the bureaucracy is coming to those decisions. Don't lord over us. You serve us. It's a public service. They've taken the public out of the service. So let's put the public back into the service and show us why. And I think we'll find we probably won't be so threatened by these biosecurity acts they're using to circumvent our natural and inalienable rights.
Chris, what would you do?
Now, as Damian was saying, accountability and transparency. If you say that we're going to lock down for 6 weeks, and then whilst you're doing that 6 weeks, when it first came out, everybody just assumed everyone was going to die. It was Ebola, and we were all getting it, and that's fair enough. We didn't know anything, but as it became more and more apparent, and then they just sort of kept extending it without actually explaining why they were extending it. I think if you're going to make a decision, I need to see which doctors you spoke to, and what their advice was and what you've made the decision on. If you've got 10 doctors on one side, it's easy to go and find 10 doctors who think one way, but it's pretty hard to find 10 doctors that go the other way when you've written in regulation that they get kicked out of the doctor's thing if they say something else. So they need to be protected under their medical...
So what would you do on a practical level? You would protect them, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so if they're going to speak up and say, well, hang on a minute, I've got some different stuff here, then they need to be able to speak. Like, you can't make a decision based off 10 people telling you the same thing. And if these 10 people are then going to be also anonymous, it's like, well, how do you know Dan didn't just say the same thing 10 times? So we need to protect people's, again, it's freedom of speech, where you come out where it needs to be protected. So you need to make the decision, you need to show what you've made the decision based on, and it needs to be published. Like, if you're like, we've made a decision, this is what it is, having a party in the background just doing their own thing and then coming out with a decision and then going, that's what it is, and we're going to lock it up for 75 years. Like, there's no accountability for that. Like, how's WorkSafe not investigating people dying and that sort of thing? So if you make a decision and it's transparent, people will accept it. If you don't have it transparent and then when it goes wrong, you don't admit that you did the wrong thing, we need to change it, or you don't take accountability for that decision when you haven't shown how you made that decision, then you need to be stood down or impeached, as Morgan was saying.
Warren, what would you do?
So obviously it's circumstantial and it's very much dependent on the risk that is deemed most appropriate to require action. I'd like to come up with a set of determined risks, factors involved, and just coordinate with other freedom-focused representatives on a strategy to both risk mitigate and also to maintain the freedoms of action and movement within the country. I don't believe say this circumstance, another pandemic or whatnot, I don't believe the expense of economic and social values are to be abused in this circumstance. I do believe it should be up to the individual to decide what level of risk they're prepared to accept without government overreach.
Well, let's say climate change, the world is burning down. So we've got to shut everything down to protect the planet.
Well, it's the same circumstance, isn't it?
So what would you do to stop it? To stop them, if you were in power, what would you stop them from using science?
Well, do you know what I'd do? I'd do exactly what my party does, and I'd try and determine the actual risk involved and the causation of the risk involved. While most people want to toe the line that it is completely man-made, I still genuinely believe that there's not enough evidential science to support that statement. So having said that, we need to determine the science first and foremost and work out what actionable intel we actually have.
How do we determine that science? How do we do that as in a way?
Well, if you can't replicate an experiment and achieve the same desired outcomes, then you haven't got enough actionable science to act on.
Nick, what would you do?
I'm up. Actually, our catchphrase, if you go on our website and look at all our stuff, is truth, transparency and accountability. So first and foremost, you need to get to the truth. You need to find out what's actually going on and not just be told, follow the science, and that's good enough, and we're all supposed to believe that, and make people accountable. Once we realised, a while into 2020 that this is not a killer disease, it's not going to wipe out everybody who's unvaccinated because no one was vaccinated until whatever in 2021, everyone was still around. Once we realised that it was a certain thing, we should have opened everything back up again. We should have been pushing back and saying, right, well, you know what, no one's dropping dead in the streets like the footage in China at the very, very beginning where everyone completely freaked out. Having people in the Senate, and any of the gentlemen that are along here, we all believe in our freedoms. We need to get involved. We need to put pressure on the lower house. We need to put pressure on the people who are sitting back and signing off on these things that are destroying people's lives. David, what would you do?
I think the first thing to do would be to look again at the application of the harm principle. Is the current emergency that they're, whatever it might be, this hypothetical, are people harming each other or not? And then also look at, and I think one of the things that we saw during the pandemic was that when the government came in with these emergency health directions, they lent very heavily on the precautionary principle, which means that they don't require all of the scientific evidence in order to take action to prevent some disease spread. But what I'd like to see going forward in the future is to have a precautionary principle applied to government action itself, because that wasn't applied, I don't think, because there was many harms that came from the government action itself, which in many ways were worse than the disease. I think that we need to be very careful in applying any sort of government action and use very precautionary measures on whether we do that or not.
Morgan, what would you do?
Thanks, Rukshan. Okay, so first of all, the only scenario that I can understand a curtailing of our freedom is if there was an active war in Australia, as pointed out by Ralph before. But through the context of pandemic emergency powers or other emergency powers due to some type of risk or alleged risk, I consider that we have substantial evidence now that the government in general cannot be trusted with this degree of power, as demonstrated through COVID-19 in their response and the enactment of executive order over an entire country, right? Locked in our homes, arrested violently, and the evidence was never shown to demonstrate that the actions were proportionate to the risk. So therefore, my stance is really staunch on this. I 100% support the complete removal of pandemic emergency powers. I don't think they should exist. We need a system in Australia that's based on personal responsibility. Even if there's a virus that is ripping through 40% of the population, I still don't trust the government to be in charge of managing some type of response. It should be up to us to manage our own risk and take care of our families. We're smart enough. There must be open debate between both sides so that we, the public, can actually understand what the true risks are and then make our decisions how we proceed from there.
Thank you, Morgan. Next question, starting with Damian. We're facing $1 trillion in debt as a nation. What are your ideas to take us out of debt while relieving pressure on the cost of living?
I'll take that question on notice. Thanks, Rukshan.
Okay.
Just trying it out, David.
I wasn't sure.
Just giving it a go. I was trying it on, you know what I mean? Yeah, what do you play for that?
You truly are an actor because you had me.
Well, I guess you have to, ultimately, somewhere along the line, you have to say, you have to stop printing money. And so there's things I don't understand. So what does it mean? Like when I grew up, I was told if I borrowed money from someone, somewhere along the line, I was going to have to pay it back. So I was living in a situation of debt, which unnerved me, made me feel very uncomfortable. And eventually I felt better about myself if I did have to pay a debt back. Suddenly, where are we? We're in a world now where you can just keep printing off as much money as you want, and you can put your country into as much debt as possible, and then you just turn around and you say you need some more money. Where's the money even coming from? Who's got this money that everyone just keeps spending? And you go even further into debt. If someone said to me now, and America's got even more debt than us, but even Australia, hey, why don't you lend some money to Australia? And someone said, oh, Australia's $1 billion already in debt. Well, I'd say, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. And it's the same thing if I thought there was someone at school that I was lending money to and they were never going to pay me back, and they said, can I borrow some more money? Well, I would be a fool to do it a second time. So at what point does the country begin to take responsibility for itself? And I always thought that was something that the Liberal Party were meant to do. But they've abrogated that responsibility and they're just shadowing Labor now. We're shadowing the left, are we? So everyone's just lurching to the left. And what's he hoping for? Oh, I'm not the other guy. So in the quietness of the ballot box, you might still put me one because at least I'm not as bad as him. Is that really? That's hardly an inspiration, is it, for anybody? Uniting the base.
So you've answered one half of the question. The second half of the question, I'll give you 30 seconds because we've gone way over time. The second half of the question is how do you do that while keeping the cost of living down?
This is really easy answer. In many respects, you begin to rationalise the bureaucrats. You rationalise them, as I have not seen done for a very long time. Maybe Jeff Kennett was the last time I witnessed it. And I wasn't even necessarily a supporter of Jeff Kennett at that particular point in time. But now I see how imperative it is. Because if they don't get rationalised, they just keep going on. They just keep going on with this theoretical understanding of the world that means nothing to you on an individual level. And it oppresses us ultimately. But if they did get rationalised, I reckon some of them would start to actually pull their head in because they'd worry, well, who does the bell toll for next?
Chris, how would you tackle cost of living issues and the increasing debt in Australia?
I think it's two things. It's one thing is obviously you need to cut back where we're spending a whole bunch of money. Like Damian was saying with the bureaucrats, like if all these major parties seem to be going, I'm going to put 20 billion into that. And it's like, that's cool, that's a great big number, but what does that mean for the end user? Like, if you were to go and tell me, like, I'm going to give you 1,300 coppers, and I'm like, well, I know for a start, you can only put through 40 a fortnight or whatever it is. So you're looking at a 3-year thing anyway. So you just saying that you've thrown 20 billion at it isn't really doing anything. But I'm also aware that on the way we're paying for recruiting because we've outsourced that. We're paying for all these other agencies that we've outsourced or we've got people in there that are doing checks and balances on the people doing checks and balances. Like even just the AEC thing, there's like 5 people sitting there marking off to make sure I write my name correctly and stuff. And I get that there needs to be checks and balances, but do I need 4 people in each room to do that over and over again? Like there's a lot of money being wasted. We had one door put in when I was at my office, and it cost 28 grand for a door. We had 2 chippies that would have done it for 5 grand. You know, like the tender process seems to be terrible. There's no oversight and that sort of thing. But the other side is we need to stop just selling everything that we own so we can actually make some money. So like if you're investing in local manufacturing, local energy producing, like all that sort of stuff, then at least we can employ people and we can start making money again instead of selling off all our assets that actually work.
Warren?
Yeah, so same sort of sentiment. I have an 18-year-old daughter and I'm trying to teach her about money now. And if you bring the whole economy down to the micro scale, you have the same setup basically. You don't need to go out and buy a brand new 4-bedroom house as your first house. You don't need a brand new $100,000 car as your first car. You need to minimise your outgoings and capitalise on the resources you do have. So when you expand that out to the macro economy, then obviously you need to, with regard to minimising outgoings, stop the blatant spending. Stop the printing of money, as was previously indicated. Just smart policy can do this. And then when it comes to capitalising on the resources you do have, try and get more for what you're already selling. So look at your free trade agreements. And if you decide that they're to the detriment of, the local economy, then scrap them, get rid of them. Why are we still selling commodities? It's the old adage, you sell the milk, not the cow. Well, we've consistently been selling the cow in this country for 20 years, more. We need to stop that. We need to hang on to our national resources and assets for, that they're absolutely vital for the future of our economy and for future generations.
One could potentially argue free trade is freedom. So if you say that is then a line for freedom, is that something that you would?
Well, so no, I still believe we need to go back and redefine what defines the actual term national interest. And if it doesn't fall within the national interest of this country and our economy, then scrap it. It's not free. It's free for them. It's not free for us.
So just to clarify for the viewer and the voter, is when you're saying freedom, it's freedom for the Australian, the best for the national. Look, in the national interest. So
with regard to trade, if a free trade agreement doesn't scratch both backs, if somebody's getting more scratch than the other, that's the best way I can put it. The reality is, oh, thanks, mate. The reality is, if it's not in the national interest of Australia, regardless of what you call it...
There would be some Australians, this is the question that I'm probably not articulating.
All right, well then I'll go a little further and say, is what we're getting back from this agreement as good as what we're giving?
No.
Or are we getting market shelves flooded with substandard products that price ourselves out of said markets?
Completely understand that argument. All I'm trying to define here and to clarify is when we all talk about being freedom, we're running on the idea that we are freedom-focused candidates, and you're then saying that, hold on, but free trade is good up to a point that it does. Then you would be curtailing some Aussies that are having their back nicely scratched because of that free trade agreement. How do we justify that? And is that just one of those lines?
Well, this is where I'd go back and justify the definition of in the national interest. The reality is we need to rectify the mistakes of the past, not just the last 2 years, but the last 20, 30 years for the benefit of the future. And we need to make those changes now in the present. Selflessly and scrupulously. And it's not going to be everyone's not going to do well out of this. Everyone's not going to be happy. But that's a risk we need to take for the benefit of the future. We've got to stop planning 3 to 5 years at a time. And we've got to start planning 20, 30 years ahead.
So is it fair to say then the stance would be, going back to the second question I think we had, where's your line in freedom? One of those lines would be if it's not in the national interest, then the individual's freedom can be curtailed. Is that fair to say? With regards, well, I guess you can apply it to anything, but the national interest here, we're talking about free trade.
So long as we have a defined set of terms legally defining what national interest means.
Okay. So you would define that?
Well, it needs definition. You can't just say that. 'cause
How
then
would you define that?
well, you're leaving it open to interpretation alternative otherwise. So realistically...
Do you see where I'm going with this? I'm
I see
just
what you
trying
mean.
to understand.
I can see it would encroach on the freedoms, but I think it's more so going to encroach on the freedoms of corporations and less so on individuals.
Thank you. Nick?
I'm going to begin by answering your question with another question. And if we all go back and think, how
Are you
was...
Greek or Jewish?
Greek. Let's ask ourselves, how well were we travelling before this started? Well, I'll tell you how well, really well. And not just really well before the pandemic hit, as in our economy and everything else. If we look even back as far as, say, 2008, when the global financial crisis happened and the whole world fell apart, Australia was the shining light. Now, we just really have to focus. It's not rocket science as far as I'm concerned. We have to focus on getting things back to the way they were. How were they before? Everything was open for a start. There wasn't a vaccinated economy where, depending on who you ask, 50% of people could go shopping or 60% of people could go shopping. Now, the media will make you believe that 95% of people were going, but that's another debate for another time. We need to open things up. We need to get people back in the workforce. Now, we know about the 2,500 school teachers. We know about, CMFEU workers. We know about people like myself in construction and nurses and everybody else. But when you're driving along and you're hearing ads on the radio from Seek saying, well, there's more jobs available than ever before, then you have to ask a question. Well, where are these jobs coming from? They're coming from people who are stood down, good people, good Australian, hard-working, tax-paying people.
So to clarify, your response to the debt would be reopening the economy, and you believe that that would repay the debt?
Well, it's a huge debt because obviously, it's been going for a while and we're paying people, a lot of money to sit at home and do nothing, essentially. Job Seeker, Job Keeper and all the other sort of COVID stuff. You catch COVID, here's $1,000 for getting sick. I mean, there is, as far as I know, this is the worst debt that we've ever been in, ever. Okay, because it's come from an unprecedented situation. So it's not going to get fixed overnight. It's not going to get fixed in a short period of time either. But if we get things back moving again, that's the best way. You get people in the workforce, and when they're working, they're spending their money back in the economy, so they're putting their money back into the economy, and they're paying their taxes. That's getting things rolling again and getting our debt down.
Thank you, Nick. David?
Thank you. So there's two issues here. One is the debt and one is the cost of living. On the debt side of things, our proposal is for an immediate cut in all federal government departments by 10% except for defence, followed by a 1% cut per year until the debt's repaid. We don't think we've got a revenue problem. We think we've got a spending problem. Further, on the cost of living side of things, we're proposing that on the energy side of things, because energy feeds into everything that we do, to cut fuel excise tax, cut or abolish it, which will lower the cost of transport and these sort of things. And also on energy production, we don't support favouring or prohibiting particular forms of energy. We think that all energy subsidies should be removed and all artificial prohibitions should be removed, such as the prohibition on nuclear energy, to allow all forms of energy to compete in a free market. On top of that, to alleviate cost of living pressures, we're proposing to increase the tax-free threshold to $40,000 per year, and on top of that, a flat tax of 20%, which would also align with a flat tax of 20% on corporate profits as well.
But just, as a simpleton, as soon as you cut, it's got to come from somewhere. So it's going to come from, is that not going to hit the everyday Australian at the end of the day that we're trying to help with their cost of living, which is why we purposely put these questions together, because we watched last night in the debate when they were talking about the cost of living, that was one issue. And then the next moment you hear the two major party leaders throwing money around. Now, we've heard everyone on here saying they're going to cut. But as soon as you cut, it does end up, you have to cut from all these programs, some of which are helping people's cost of living. How do you ensure that you won't? Because we're going in a direction where people are worried about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, with the proposition that making a cut helps people's cost of living, it always comes from the taxpayer somewhere else. So none of this is free money that's coming from nowhere. It always comes from somewhere else. But I actually think 10% is quite achievable. Like anyone that thinks that there's not 10% of waste in federal government departments hasn't really been in contact with government enough. I think that 10% is quite conservative, really. It should be fairly easy, I think, to look across all of the government departments, and you know, some of them maybe could go all together. You know, but I think. But I think 10% is quite achievable, and you know, with some focus on efficiency, it should be easy.
I just racked up a list of departments that can go, but that's for another.
I've got a list myself.
Morgan.
All right, great. Thank you. So it wasn't all that long ago that our debt was less 20 times than what it is now. So we've got a crisis of government here, with government spending completely out of control. So here are some ideas and things that I'll always stand up for. I'm advocating for a top to bottom audit on every single government department in this country, starting with ones that are considered to be the most wasteful. Many people who feel left behind by the NDIS are complaining that they're not able to receive treatment at the expense of people in officers who are on huge incomes. That's just a little example. Okay, so I believe this should be appointed by the private sector to detect wasteful spending. Every government grant, every audit needs to be reviewed very, very thoroughly. That is something I intend to do if I'm elected to the Senate. It needs to be called out, and with hopefully support from other allies, can be stopped. In addition to that, we see foreign mining corporations in Australia that are receiving years on end of royalty exemptions. We need to remove that, and they need to pay their fair share of tax in Australia. And while we're at it, Facebook and big tech have gotten away for too long, skimping out on tax on this country as well. Okay, so that's in relation to the debt. In terms of the cost of living, I'm not sure how long I've got, but I'm trying to squeeze it all in. I'm a massive, massive supporter of tax cuts for corporations that are Australian-owned, that produce Australian-made products. If we look at countries around the world that have some of the greatest economic complexity in terms of their diversity, of their manufacturing base, what do they all share in common? They have a low corporate tax rate. We're talking about Japan, Switzerland, Germany, South Korea, Singapore. They're not actually smarter human beings than us, but they have more freedom to be able to earn more profits, reinvest into their companies, export opportunities can arise from having a low corporate rate, which brings dollars flowing into the country. We want those dollars coming in, not dollars going out. So I'm all in favour of that.
Quick question, interjection on the first bit that you said, where you would advocate for an audit of all government. It sounds like a great idea, but how do we know that that audit process itself, like every other government institute, is not itself going to become just another expensive royal commission that gets nowhere?
That's a great question. Well, the audit should not be the audit should not be conducted by a government entity. It must be conducted by a private entity that does not have some type of handshake agreement with some suit sitting in Canberra where they've had a beer and they've agreed upon a contract. That's how these government grants are exacerbated in the first place. These are all deals that take place behind closed doors. So what I would like in a perfect world, and I say if you're going to dream big, is for the public to put up their hands and say, we recommend this company right here to conduct the audit. It should be completely separate of the government.
Ralph?
All right, so Scott Morrison and his treasurer Josh Frydenberg have run up over $1 trillion of debt, but what is $1 trillion? It's $1,000 billion. What is $1 billion? It's $1,000 million. So the debt is absolutely huge. Now, neither of the major parties, Labor or Liberal, have laid out a plan on how they intend to deal with this debt. And let's be clear, this debt is a burden over Australia. So the relationship between high debt levels and high interest rates is very, very clear. We know that inflation at the moment is over 5%. I believe it's 5.1%. So studies show that if interest rates go from 2% to 4%, the average mortgage of $650,000 is going to go up by about $1,400 a month. So the debt is a very, very big deal. Now, the Liberal and National Coalition are saying that they're going to take up to 180 years to pay off the debt, and they're not even going to start for another 10 years approximately. Now, if interest rates keep going up, which they will because the debt is so high, Australians will lose their homes. So how are we going to pay off the debt? We are going to introduce a 15% export licence on all iron ore exports from Australia. We will let the Chinese Communist Party pay off our debt. Australia supplies over 80% of all iron ore to Asian manufacturing markets. So with this export licence, we think that this debt will be paid off in approximately 20 years, thereby saving Australians from, no doubt, increased taxes and high interest rates.
Interjection, yeah?
Can I I'd like to ask a question. Now, what happens in the scenario where China brings Australia to the World Trade Organisation and says that we've violated the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement?
No worries. So we must exit all trade agreements and all foreign entities that do not serve the best interests of Australia. It should be and must be Australia first in all situations. Now, if we are part of a particular trade deal that does not serve our interests first, we must exit straight away immediately. Now, I'm not opposed to cooperating and trading with other countries. That's fine, but we must do it with our best interests at heart. And if those deals are not good enough for us, we must exit or we must renegotiate.
So what happens when China starts punishing us for that?
China, in relation to our iron ore, cannot punish us because there is nowhere else where they can buy the ore from. Our ore is
There's
some
plenty
of
of
the
other ways they can punish us, though, isn't there?
Look,
Do you know what I mean? No,
at the end of the day, we can't bend the knee to China. At some point, we're going to have to stand up and say enough is enough. We're going to push back, and for once, we're going to treat Australia like Australia matters. We're going to put Australia first.
So someone has to make an argument, though, somewhere along the line for a reduction in the standard of living, because in the short term, there will be a reduction in the standard of living as we begin to develop our own industries.
Look, I don't think there's going to be a reduction in the standard of living. That's just an assumption that you're making there. What I think is going to happen is we have to take
We're all making assumptions here.
We have to take the reins off our entrepreneurs here in Australia, take the reins of industry, take the reins of business. We need to start making things again, and we need to start producing things that we need, and we need to start selling things to the rest of the world, because right now we've handed that all over to China, and that's why they are economically the big dog in this fight, and that's not okay.
Thank you. Continue the debate.
There will be an opportunity. Big dog as well.
There'll be an opportunity later on to ask any questions you want to the candidates here.
These are hard questions, though. They're very difficult to come up with answers to, really, ultimately. I mean, seriously.
Without raising more questions.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly, because that's, that's under the proviso that, the cost of iron ore and demand remains high as well. It raises a whole other set of questions.
So next question, I'll start with Chris. What would you do to protect free speech, including free speech online?
Well, I don't know how much control we have over telling Facebook what they can and can't censor, but I think the definition that they're running with misinformation is just stuff we don't agree with anymore. I think we need to go with, you've got a right to say whatever, but other people have a right to then debate it. So if someone comes up with some wacky theory that they come out with, and then you go, you know what, I'm just not going to let you talk about that, that person's not going to change their mind. And then 3 other people are going to go, well, why did you get rid of that? And then they're going to go, maybe there's something to that.
So what will you do as a senator? What would you be advocating, fighting for? What is your position?
We need to make it so that you can't, if people have got a right to say something, if it's not harming anybody, it might upset someone's feelings, and that's fine. You look at Pauline, she's been saying what she wants to say for the last 20 years, and she's probably the staunchest female in Australia at the moment, the amount of abuse she's copped. But regardless whether you like her, whether you like her or not, the fact that she's allowed to say that is what people join the army for. The fact that you're allowed to say what you want, do what you want, and then you'll be backed for doing it. If you're not harming somebody else, then you need to back that. So, if somebody's got one...
How will you protect it?
Well, there needs to be...
And online, including online. So not just in person. Pauline Hanson's been doing it for years in person, but she's been censored online. So how would you, as a senator, and that's the question, what would you put forth, what would you fight for to protect even Pauline Hanson online from big tech?
Well, so the Bill of Rights that everyone keeps speaking about, it obviously look different depending on which party you're at, but from what I've heard, there's at least 5 people that have come up with a Bill of Rights. So a Bill of Rights needs to be put in, and if one of them is freedom of speech, then companies over here need to abide by them. So if you've got something that you put up a post, or Pauline's put up a post, or Clive's put up a post or whatever, and it gets taken down, then that needs to please explain from the government. And if they've got a valid reason of why that is, then that needs to be published. And that goes to other media as well. If you're in the newspaper and you've got a front page article saying a bunch of army guys did this and they're the worst people in the world and they're all war criminals, and then you find out down the track that they weren't, and then you put a little 3 centimetre thing at the end of the paper that says, sorry about that, we were wrong, then that's rubbish. So if you have a front page ad that you've made something that comes on there, and then you need to put a full page apology as well. Media needs to be accountable for censorship and for saying the wrong thing. Chris.
Warren?
So I'd agree with your reference to the Bill of Rights. However, I'd probably go as far as to say we need to legislate something on paper that would be predetermined by a cross-section of the community on what we determine as appropriate on social media. And if we deem that, we come up with a set of parameters with which these platforms need to abide by. If they want to operate within this country or the confines of this country, then they need to have a review board within this country, not externally, that ensures that they comply with those freedoms that we've decided were the parameters with which they were allowed to operate within this country. And I think that that goes for both the individual level and both social media.
Nick?
I think it was sort of towards late 2020, before the US election, they were trying to introduce some sort of legislation. I think they were sort of headed towards Twitter and Facebook mainly, but they were going on there and editing people's posts, and now they weren't created initially for people to put their opinions up and then have them edited. So we need to put something in place that stops that. People's right to free speech. I mean, people do have a right to free speech.
What would you put in place? What would you put in place?
I think just you need to put in some sort of legislation that says unless it's offensive, like if I've said something directly offensive, okay, that's fine. Of course you're going to take it off.
Define offensive.
Could be about your sexuality, it could be about the way you look, it could be about your religion, it could be about
so these are all subjective things which Facebook says that's what they're removing now. So do you have a problem with what they're removing now?
I have a problem with the censoring. My partner had a Twitter account, a blue tick, 40,000 followers, made one comment, wasn't even offensive to anything, and got taken off.
So who defines offensive?
Well, that's what I'm saying. The social media companies seem to have their own rules and operate.
But I'm saying who
defines that? Well, I think
in your world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to come up with something, we need to put things in place to say that this is okay and this is crossing the line. So that's not going to be easy. That's going to take a while to nut out. But something needs to be put in place. Well, we know where the line is. Well, we can say up to here is okay and acceptable, and if we've crossed the line, then obviously there's going to be some sort of a consequence. That's fine. I don't have an issue with that.
So you want to legislate where the boundary is for free speech?
Pretty much, yeah.
David?
Thank you. I'd like to firstly say that, what I think of when we talk about free speech and limitations on free speech. When I talk about free speech, I'm talking about government limitations on speech, not through private associations, through companies and things like this.
The question though is both.
Yep.
What would you do for government?
Both.
What would you do for online?
Yep. So with regards to government limitations on speech, we're proposing a constitutional amendment to guarantee free speech in the Australian Constitution, similar to the First Amendment in the US, which would ensure that the government can't censor people. That would also include the right to peacefully protest. The limitations on that free speech would be around threats, basically, when we consider that as an initiation of aggression. In terms of tech companies and other platforms, I think I have a fairly different view to some of the other panellists here. I think the government should stay the hell out of it. I don't believe that government can manage these things better than the voluntary interactions of people with these platforms. We've already seen pushback against Facebook because of some of the things that they've done, and also we've also seen massive pushback against what Twitter has done, and then the market has sort of resolve that with a repurchase of Twitter. So I think that the private sector can manage these things, and the government shouldn't intervene unless there is an issue of threats.
But are you not worried when it comes to relying on the market that powerful sources that have, deep pockets and very ideological things and we've seen it for years, they can determine elections. In fact, I think a lot of the panellists here are probably banned off a number of platforms. So when you say you don't want to legislate, you want government to stay out of it, do you think big, powerful social media companies, that whether it's owned by Elon Musk or, Zuckerberg, do you think that they should have free rein in Australia to do whatever it is and let the market decide?
Yes, because what you've got is once we start dictating to all these companies, and let's be clear, a company is just a group of people, right, that have formed together to build something together. We're interfering with their freedom of association. We can't rightly, tell these companies how they should and shouldn't conduct their business whilst at the same time claiming that our own associations should be able to happen however they want, like religious groups and all these other groups, right? Like if we've got organisations that are run by private individuals, the government should stay out of it unless there's force involved.
So what if you don't want to bake a gay cake? It's a private business.
I don't think you should have to.
You shouldn't have to, yeah.
But hasn't the private sector already proved itself inadequate at the task?
I don't think so. Like there's been massive numbers of new tech platforms that have popped up in response to some of the censorship. Like, I know some of us use them, things like Rumble and all these other platforms. Some of the platforms have changed the way that they've operated. And conversely, the idea that government can come in and manage Facebook, the idea that the Australian government is going to come in and manage Facebook and use that for good, I just don't think that they're capable of doing it.
Morgan?
Would you mind repeating the question, please?
Sure. What would you do to protect free speech, including free speech online?
Okay, so I agree with a number of the candidates here that we absolutely need a Bill of Rights and greater protections for our free speech in Australia. It's been severely under attack, especially through COVID-19. Without free speech, it shuts down dialogues, debates are shut down, and we've seen particularly over the past 2 years, great professionals, medical professionals, excluded from debates online within the government from actually coming to a solution for this crisis. So when it comes to online, I've got a pretty staunch stance on this. So since I consider that free speech should be enshrined in the highest order of the land, I consider that social media, big tech, that inhibits the free speech of Australians should be dealt with hefty fines. I consider it should be a crime to interfere in our speech, which is not an act of aggression or a form of threatening to hurt somebody, and social media has absolutely no business dictating what happens in our country in terms of discourse. It's supposed to be a marketplace of ideas similar to a town square, but instead social media and big tech have hijacked that process in order to push whatever narrative they have, and we know that big tech and social media have political alignments there, and so I think we need to really crack down and start dishing out fines on these companies for messing with our free speech.
Ralph?
Well, foreign tech giants, for example, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, they should not be able to censor any Australian or Australian political debate. As some of you may know, our leader, Craig Kelly, has been permanently banned from Facebook for life for sharing what they deem to be misinformation. Basically, this was alternate points of view regarding medical treatments to COVID-19, and we just can't tolerate that. We just can't trust big tech. So obviously, like I mentioned before, one of the primary things that the UAP will be seeking to enact once elected, God willing, and if the Australian people bless us with the opportunity, is a Bill of Rights which would cover freedom of speech. But more importantly, I do believe that we need to open up these social media companies to litigation in Australian court when they do lie and when they do get caught censoring people. So open it up to the public to be able to sue them for anything that they do if it's contrary to free speech.
Damian?
Look, I really don't want to talk rhetoric if I can help it, because we're at a different epoch than we've ever been at before. When we talk about these companies, these NGOs, Google, Facebook, Nike, McDonald's, the list goes on. They're bigger than nation states. So they pose a real threat to us. They pose a real threat to our freedom of speech if they want to. And what are we going to do about that? How are we going to address that? That's a really pertinent question. And that's why I'm standing to run in the Senate, and in the hope that that might be a way of being able to do it. Because it's about political will, and no one's got will for liberty at the moment. There's no interest in it. Except there's 227 federal parliamentarians, 7 of them are openly, outwardly, at some point of being against the narrative. So imagine after this election, if there was 20 of us, what would that do for free speech? I think that would do something for it, and it would give other people in the community that may be wavering, sitting on the fence because they're so frightened, they're so fearful to join in our side, some heart and some courage. Like these men here, good on you boys, courageous men standing up for freedom, because that's what it's going to take. If we can't push back, we've got to push back against this narrative, and it's huge. And it's no easy undertaking, because they own all the weapons. They disparage violence, except when they're using it. And we saw that when we were shot on the streets of Melbourne with rubber bullets. And people were saying, oh, why wasn't it live ammunition? Come on. This is a serious undertaking. And if you can't identify the problem because you're not allowed to talk about it, what chance do you have of ever solving that problem.
Thank you, Damian. Next question, starting with Warren. There's a big debate in the community about the education of children. Do you think there should be limits on ideas children are exposed to?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that we need to put limits on what concepts and ideas that children are exposed to. We need to go back to allowing our children to be children. Of course, we can't let there be hate speech or threats or whatnot amongst children, but there's ideas and concepts that kids don't need to be exposed to. They will be exposed to in their own time as they develop. And I think we need to protect that. That's what keeps our children innocent and what allows them to have a good childhood to a large extent.
Nick, same question to you.
This is a big concern for me. I have a 12-year-old son, and the last thing I want him to be indoctrinated in is, some woke agendas about certain things that are, pretty out there and pretty radical. I believe school is school. You get an education, you learn how to read, you learn how to write, you do your maths, you do your English, your science and all your other subjects, your PE and etc. And you be a child and you learn. This is a base for you to grow up and become an adult. If there's other things that you need to discuss, that's something between the child and the parent. And that should be private and that should be in the home without any agendas or ideas pushed upon by third parties.
David?
Yeah, if we're talking about schools, then we have a clear solution for this, which is decentralisation of curriculum and also having school funding follow the student rather than the school. Because I think the conflict here is that everyone's expecting like a single curriculum to cater for all needs. But as we know that there's a wide variety of needs, there's different religious groups, there's people with different philosophies. So we want to maximise choice by allowing the funding to go to the students, and then those students can, with their parents, can be empowered to choose what sort of learning is best for them, and to also decentralise the curriculum so they can choose the environment and the type of learning that's best for their family.
Morgan?
Thank you very much. So I 100% agree with David there. The education system is centralised. The curriculum is just drummed up by the government, passed down to the schools. I feel very sorry for many teachers who are actually forced to teach this curriculum against their will and having to really keep their heads down. When it comes to the education of children, I consider it disgusting, the proliferation of woke agendas in the schooling system, when young kids can come into classroom and be told that they can be a boy one day, a girl the next. I consider that it's abusive. We look at children growing up and passing through year 12. We know that many are struggling with numeracy and literacy. I'd love to see us going back to basics in this country. Australian children deserve the best. They deserve to learn the fundamentals in life to give them the best chance of having success in the future. So in terms of the politicised and woke agendas, I'll never pander to this garbage. I think it's abusive towards kids, and I'm all for stopping it.
Ralph?
Like everyone else here, I think we're all on the same page about this. We need to put a stop and an end to the woke agenda that's running rampant through schools at the moment, both primary and secondary school, and even lower down than that. Kids should be going to school to learn reading, writing and arithmetic, and to play with their friends and socialise, depending on how old they are, of course, and that's it. We absolutely need to get rid of the woke agenda, and I will not apologise for that, and that is definitely something that I'm going to be pushing for if we're lucky enough to be elected by the Australian people.
Damian?
Well, how can we make a change if we don't know the fight that we're actually in? This is globalism. That's what globalism wants to do. It wants to undermine the family. It wants to undermine your private property, and it wants to undermine religion as well. And it's given us some sort of crazy form of materialism instead. But unless we can identify that, what change can you make? Because ultimately it's up to the parents. What do the parents do for their children? There's sex education in our schools, it appears. Now, I've got 3 children. All of them have come home at one point in time on International Women's Day and said to me, I asked the teacher when it was International Men's Day, and the teachers glibly responded, every day is International Men's Day. They've all come home with the same anecdote. There's 2 years difference between all 3 of them, you know what I mean? Like, how's that the case? What's going on in the education institution? Because they're appealing to, United Nations charters, etc. Or for the common good. It's always about the common good. But there is no common good. It's individual responsibility. And I feel responsible for my children, and I resent someone else thinking that they can take that responsibility. So would we start by defunding the family court, that fine institution? What do? Purveyors of perversity that they are. They just tip people upside down and try and get as much money out of them as they can for no resolution, really. And in instances where there actually is some requirement for change to be made, then of course you need some strict enforcements. But where we're at the moment is insane, and you can't even say these things. You can't even say them. It's too frightening for everyone. But it's the truth.
Well, we can talk about it here in this platform.
Yeah, we can. Yep.
Chris?
Well, I think it's been said by everyone else. I think you need to let kids be kids, and then they need to be able to play and carry on and be 10-year-olds and eat dirt and all that sort of stuff, rather than learning about stuff that is going through puberty and that sort of stuff. And then in high school, kids are going to have questions, and then that's where your parents come into it. And if they don't feel like they can speak to their parents, there's social workers at school. So I don't feel like the teachers need to be telling people how to do stuff. I think we need to speak to kids more about where does your food come from, how do farms work, food doesn't just turn up in a supermarket. How do you vote? No kids know how to vote. Most of the adults I've spoken to don't know how to vote. They don't know about preferences. They don't know how to actually challenge the government. Kids are taking days off school to go and protest climate change on a Friday. It's would they do it on a Saturday, or are they just getting told by teachers to take a day off to go and stand up? If the kids all came together on a Saturday or Sunday, I'd be much more impressed. But yeah.
It's beautiful and it's brave to skip a day of school, trust me.
Well, I didn't change anything.
I did it from grade 6.
Nick, starting with the next question. What is the greatest threat facing Australia?
Don't look at me.
Our politicians. They're in charge of us. Good, bad or indifferent, our lives are dictated and ruled pretty much based on their decisions. If they see fit to lock down the state for 2 years and turn the world's most livable city into the world's most lockdown city, then we all sort of sit down and shake our heads and complain. Some of us will complain to the point where we want to do something about it, and that's why we're all here today. But they are our biggest threat. And I go back to, I said this the other day, where I think we're out at Canterbury, and I said a politician is a public servant. They need to go back to being a public servant. Their job is to serve us. Do what's best for us. Okay, and I think that's been forgotten. I think they're looking at their best interests and what's best for them, where they shouldn't be. It should be, I believe in small government, I believe in government doing the right things for people and getting things back to the way they should be, and for people to be free and happy and able to live their lives, once again.
I think absolutely it's our economic situation, because everything that we've spoken about tonight, cost of living, all of the things that we want to do in this country, including our defence force, all depend on having a strong economic system in Australia. So if we get into a situation where our economic performance spirals out of control, we can become very vulnerable to international conflict. We can become very vulnerable into losing our prosperity. And when these things happen, it's very difficult for people to defend, liberty, defend the environment, and all of these things that we care about in Australia when we're struggling to survive. So I think focusing on, getting rid of this debt and improving our economic performance and opening up our economy as much as possible is absolutely critical for all of these things, including national defence.
Morgan?
Greatest threat facing Australia. Okay, great question. I agree with some of the other candidates. It's definitely the politicians, the people that have been in and out of government for decades on end. Every major problem and crisis that we're facing is a result of their actions. We used to be a great manufacturing country. Our government signed trade deals. They did away with our expertise and offshored our workforce overseas. We used to be almost fuel independent in this country, and we could control the price of petrol. What happened? Deregulation. We've seen blockages put on our exploration, our refineries, making us dependent on other nations. And through the context of COVID-19, we've seen our freedoms completely eroded, maybe the biggest crisis of our country. Again, the result of government decisions. And the list goes on and on. We lost 10,000 farms between 2010 and 2020 right here in Victoria. I've spoken to people in this industry, they're telling me the same thing. Regulation, taxation and the commercialisation of the water trading market, which allows the corporates to come in, jack up the price when there's a drought. Again, the result of a government decision, a government policy that was rubber stamped in our government. So these are all politicians that have been complicit in the deindustrialisation, the destruction of our country, the erosion of our freedoms. And in my view, the only way to change this crisis is for people who actually love this country to get elected, and that's why we're all here and that's what we're hoping for.
Ralph?
I think the absolute biggest threat facing this country right now is politicians who just don't seem to care about us, who just don't seem to want to put Australia first, to put Australia second, third, fourth down the food chain, and that's not okay. Now, following on from that, to buy. So what I see as the biggest problem right now is our politicians who just don't seem to care, and our national debt, which we absolutely must sort out. Thank you.
Damian, biggest threat facing Australia?
The One Nation team members give me hand signals. I'm not sure if you... Oh, you're not giving them to me. You're giving I think it's self-loathing. And I think we've been taught through cultural Marxism to loathe who we are and who would stand up for any Western principles at this particular point in time. So how can we defend ourselves against those very real things, those very real threats that we do have to the culture, which is globalism? Is it the WEF, the WHO or the UN and their agenda? And like we've talked about, I've talked already about, and everyone has the NGOs, big organisations that are bigger than nation state? Or is it a really militant and powerful uprising China? There's 1.4 billion of them. My son pointed me out the other day, he showed me there's a road in China with 50 lanes. 50 lanes. And what are their designs? What are they doing with that base now in the Solomon Islands and buying ports, etc.? Do we trust it? Can we trust it? They're not into cultural diversity. They care about the Han Chinese in particular. Are we allowed to say that? Are we allowed to talk about it? Well, we're going to have to. We're going to have to. Otherwise, there's going to be no resolution to this. And so we have to find a way of instilling some sort of virtue and confidence in ourselves again. It's being supplanted, basically, or by globalism.
Chris, biggest threat facing Australia?
I think the Australian voters, they're very laissez-faire, laid back. Most of them are just like, she'll be right, and then they draw a penis on a piece of paper and then wonder why they get crappy government. So it's like... He didn't actually draw one then, just so everyone's wondering. Yeah. Yeah, so like all the people that have complained about the government and yet still aren't voting, all the people that are like, well, my dad and my dad's dad and, far back they were all blue, so I'm going to vote blue. Like, it's not the Tigers, it's not the Pies. Like, it's different. Like, if you're upset about how things are going and you're not going to go out and vote, then democracy doesn't mean anything. So, like, she's not going to be right. So if you don't go out and vote, it's not going to get up. Like, you look at the big two parties, we've got like 20 million each in advertising. Like, I've bought 20,000 of these. I need 700,000 votes to get in. Like, I'm sort of just kidding myself just because I like having them. But, like, it's not going to get up. I can't walk around and advertise. And even if everybody that I gave one to got up, it still wouldn't happen. Whereas on social media, if everybody actually cared, everyone wanted to actually speak about politics instead of getting upset and emotional over it and then not talking to each other again for the next 2 years like they did with COVID, you'd actually I'd be able to put out a post tomorrow, that'd be able to pass, and I could get to 700,000 people. But nobody cares about politics, and that's why we've got what we've got at the moment. Like, all these blokes have got great ideas, but if no one votes for us, then this is a whole waste of time. And you're just going to get ScoMo again. He'll be like, yeah, like Pauline says. And, and then...
So you're basically, they're saying the biggest threat, or a number of them are saying the politicians, you're saying the voters are.
Well, yeah, because the politicians are going to do what they're going to do, and they've shown what they're going to do, and they have been doing it for ages. And if you're not going to get up there and change it by voting somebody else in, then that's on you. No offence, people.
Warren?
So I'd say every individual Australia-wide, more so now than ever, has taken an active interest in the governance of our country. And it's good. Everybody needs this education. There's not enough of it. My daughter's just finished year 12 and she said, Dad, I don't even understand what the Senate is. That's a terrible failure by education again. But for me, the freedom to self-govern in the face of globalist agendas and the pandering of career politicians toward those ends, that's our biggest threat right now. We can recover our economy and come up with all the strategies we like, but the reality is we're going to fall back into the same problems if we don't separate ourselves from those globalist agendas and those globalist corporations that care only to dictate to us our social and economic policy.
Thank you. And that's it from the moderator. I'm going to pass it on to the agitator.
That concludes. So thank you everyone for keeping that respectful, and there was a moment there where there was a little bit of debate, but I think we gave, and I think we did flesh out some differences, while maybe minor differences, there were some differences there in answer, so I appreciate for the honesty and the engagement in this process. Now we're going to get to Rukshan's question to each one of you. I guess we'll just go down the line that way. We'll start with Mr. Limbrick. So you've been in Parliament in Victoria throughout the height of the pandemic. You've been in office, and despite everything you put to fight what happened here, you were unsuccessful really here. So what's going to change if you get into federal Parliament?
I don't think we were unsuccessful at all. In fact, I think that part of what we were doing is building a movement, and that's exactly what we've done. We've built a party now which is bigger than we've ever been before. We've got a huge following now, and we've woken up a lot of people to the idea of how important it is to defend liberty. And I think that this is a very, very positive direction, and this was our intention from the start. We knew that we only got 2 people elected. We can't control government with only 2 people elected. Certainly we can influence things and change the narrative and the conversation, but really what we're doing is standing up and setting an example and hoping to inspire other people to join us, and that's exactly what's happened.
So you would think that the point of difference here between last time and this time, forget which government it is, it's the fact that now that you've woken everyone up, you're going to have bigger numbers to actually, when I say unsuccessful, I mean, the bills went through, the Victoria suffered for the last 2 years. So I guess from the user's perspective, it was unsuccessful because we suffered. You're saying the point of difference is that it's...
Not only that, I think that there's other practical things that have happened that maybe didn't get so much notice, like things like when I was on the Parliamentary Accounts and Estimates Committee, one of the things that we're doing is diving into deep detail in what the government was actually doing, and a lot of that was around the police actions. And we noticed actually that after a lot of this questioning, the way that these things happened actually changed. Also, we've done things which are outside of the pandemic, like things like we've gotten inquiries up. So we got an inquiry up into nuclear prohibition in Victoria. That was us that got that up off the ground. There's been many other things where, because of our opposition, the government has had to change their position or modify, and we saw that with the pandemic bill as well. Like the initial version of the bill was actually far worse than the final version that they actually went through with. That was due to massive opposition, both within Parliament and on the streets.
And now he's putting the agriculture bill through as well.
Morgan, so how can we trust your judgment if a few, not recently, you were part of UAP and you flipped, right before an election to become an independent? How can we trust that your judgment within government, if you are in government, is steady and safe?
Well, I think I demonstrated, unlike what other people, say, in office are willing to do, I put my hand up and said I was wrong. I thought that I was in an outfit that was best suited to me. I thought that's where I could be most effective. After getting involved in that system, I quickly realised that absolutely was not the case, and that maintaining my own individuality was what was most important in my fight for Australia and how I've conducted my life as a sole trader before COVID and operating an independent media show. So I think what that demonstrates to people is that if I do make a mistake, I'm not the type of guy that's just going to continue making the same mistake because I don't want to lose face. I'll put my hand up and say that I'm wrong. I don't think that's something that will happen very often with me, but I think everybody's human and once in a while it's bound to happen. And I think the Australian people can be pretty confident that I've run an independent news show for over 2 years. I've called the government out, spoken the truth, and I'll always endeavour to do the right thing. So I can say that hand on heart.
Ralph, you represent the UAP. UAP purports to fight for the little guy, but it's owned by a billionaire that has reportedly mistreated or underpaid the little guy within his. Why should the little guy believe that the UAP is actually going to fight for him?
Well, first of all, I believe that you're referring to the media narrative that Clive Palmer didn't pay his workers, which is a complete falsehood. Clive Palmer did pay his workers in full, 100 cents in the dollar, so let's get that straight. Now, the United Australia Party, we are a group of 151 candidates in the lower house. Every single candidate is a normal, everyday person that's just had enough. They probably live around the corner from where you live. So right there, you need to be able to understand that we are not career politicians. This is not what we've dreamed about since we're small children, like old mate Daniel Andrews, who's been in politics since the 90s, so 20-something years. That's all he knows, that's all he's ever known. We are regular, normal, everyday people, and we want to make a difference to our country, to our families, to our communities, and that's what a politician needs to be. They need to be someone that lives around the corner from you, someone that understands your struggles, your problems, your issues, and is able to relate back to you. We are not political animals, and that's exactly why we are great people to lead the country. Thank you.
I'm going to be a bit controversial here because you obviously came from UAP. You are in UAP. You say it didn't suit you. A lot of the things you're talking about sound the same. So what didn't suit you about the UAP?
Well, the structure didn't suit me, first of all. When you're part of a political party, with a lot of political parties, you're answerable to management. So I don't seek to be answerable to management of anybody. I seek to be answerable to the Australian people. I seek to speak to whoever asks me any questions, no matter who they are and where they come from, whether it's in the mainstream media or somebody on the street. So I'm not the type of guy that can follow a line, get in line. The only line I'm seeking is for this country. I'm seeking to pay back this country. I've accumulated a massive debt in terms of what I've inherited from Australia, from our diggers, from people that worked hard, and I'm a free-range chicken. I'm here to represent the people, man, and it's just really, no one can control me or push me around.
So was there something specific in UAP that bothered you to make you realise that or leave, or was it just a natural evolution of the process?
It was pretty natural. I didn't want to continue down a line whereby I saw there could be the potential for potentially getting controlled or told to bite my tongue on one topic or another.
Did something happen that made you realise that?
I was looking forward into the future.
We would love to put it to UAP if there is something, or was it just a general vibe, the vibe of it?
So that's a very good question. That's a great question. Well, looking at the party structure, I can tell you that I wasn't comfortable, and I considered that could be a possibility. So therefore, I decided it would be better for me to remove myself.
What in the structure? Because we would love to ask him. He's right next to you, and that's the point of tonight.
I can make that
what in the structure did you see that you felt uncomfortable with?
So
I think the voter wants to know.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm not going to follow a policy schedule. So I've written a big, long policy schedule, and I think that if I was to publicly speak about it, it would have most definitely upset management. I have pretty strong stances on many different things, including, say, for instance, firearms, okay? And I know that UAP is not really putting forward a policy like that. And if anybody told me you can't talk about A, B, or C, or you're out, I would tell that person to get stuffed like anybody else. So I thought I'd just save everybody the hassle and call it myself. And it didn't feel right to me. Okay, so it didn't feel right. I've always spoken out against our iron ore industry as well to China. I know that UAP is putting a good policy forward to tax iron ore exports. If it works, I think it will be absolutely fantastic. But a big problem is also our iron ore that's now coming back to Australia in the form of naval warships. A lot of people made a lot of money on that. I also wasn't comfortable with that. So there you go.
Do you want to answer any of that?
Look, what Morgan is saying is fair enough, and that's what works for him, and that's fine. So the United Australia Party, we're a group of 151 people in the lower house, and obviously every Senate seat in the upper house has also got somebody there as well. We are part of a bigger machine, right? And he's an individual, he wants to be an individual, and that's fine for him. But in order to make change in the country, in order to make a difference, you have to have the majority in the lower house. And you're not going to do that by being a lone wolf. I love Morgan, he's a great guy. And if I'm elected, I will do everything I can to work with him. Let's make that clear. But in order to form government, you need more than 76 seats.
UAPs, freedom. I've just realised that there's a policy here that sounds like UAP is against freedom, firearms. Why?
Look, at the end of the day, it's something that I believe the average Australian might push back against. Having said that, when we are formulating our Bill of Rights, we will have a referendum and we'll put it to the Australian people. And what the Australian people decides, that's what it's going to be. But I'm not going to stand here and say we're all going to have the right to bear arms, because I don't know what the Australian public is going to respond to that. But I will put it to them if I'm elected.
We're all going to save money, but we're all going to keep having these referendums all the time. It's going to be an interesting...
I hear that, but I guess that goes back to the second question in the beginning of this debate, the line for freedom. Well, here there is a clear question of the right to bear arms, which in itself is not harming anyone else unless you use the firearm unlawfully, which you can do now with an unlawful firearm. So your right to bear arms, that is a line in UAP for freedom.
I wouldn't say it's a line. What I would say, it is up to the Australian people to decide what they wish to do. So I will be beholden to the Australian people, and everything that I or we do as a party will always go back to what the people wish.
But as we just were notified, it's going to be a very expensive process if every little question we need to put to a referendum. If the policies of the UAP is around the idea of freedom, wouldn't something like the right to bear arms just be a given?
No, I don't think so, because the right to bear arms is an issue which is very, very heated. It's kind of like abortion, right? It's very, very hot. And it's not up to me to make that decision. It's a big, big deal. It's up to the people. And the people will decide that one, not me.
Yeah, I might just add in on that, Avi. Getting into politics and running, I first asked myself the question, what do I think is the greatest problem with candidacy and people running for office? And I would say the biggest problem is nobody goes out there and tells the public who they are. They stand behind a political brand name. They refuse to really talk about or reveal much about who they are. So in order to understand the type of people who are getting elected into office, I consider it imperative that candidates go out and tell the public who they are. Where were they born? Where did they grow up? What do they stand for? What do they not stand for? Because by understanding these types of things, the Australian voter can gain a better understanding of what type of person will be in office and how they're likely to vote on bills. Are they more likely to vote their conscience or toe a party line? And I can tell you there's a lot of people in office right now voting a party line, and it's a massive crisis.
But to be fair, all we hear from Albanese is about who he is and where he came from. He's a single mum, born in... I can tell you about his life, and I've only listened to about 2 minutes of the bloke. So I don't know, what would you answer to that? Is there not too much of that? Don't people care more about policy?
Absolutely. Policy is vitally important, but it's also important to understand the character of the person and understand their integrity, hopefully how willing they are to go ahead and enact the policy that they claim to believe in. Anthony Albanese is another story because he's the leader of the opposition. So he's out there, he's patting dogs, he's conducting these stupid little photo opportunities like Scott Morrison cutting people's hair because he's seeking to capitalise on the informal vote. But if you'll notice, if you go around and look at the other Labor candidates out there, they're just like a blank slate. They're not saying anything, they're just repeating talking points, and people who vote for them, they don't know if they're voting for a psychopath. And we have an abundance of psychopaths in office. So personally, I mean, if I'm going to dream, I'm going to dream big. I'd love to see a Senate ticket with absolutely no names. It's supposed to be the no political party names. It's meant to be the House of Review. If we're all elected, we're meant to represent Victoria, not a particular political party. A party is a vehicle, and I understand that it is necessary at this point in our history. Don't get me wrong, but too often candidates get elected and fall into the habit of serving their party, serving the UN, not their fellow citizens. It's garbage. It's absolute garbage.
And so to achieve what Morgan's talking about, you can vote 1 for me and vote 2 for Morgan, and you get exactly that.
We'll get to that in a moment. We'll get to that in a moment. But I guess this did bring up a policy that I didn't think about, and we'll just quickly run through the panel before we continue on with the tough questions. Right to bear arms, yes or no?
In principle, but I don't think it's something that the Australian...
But I think it's only fair now that it's come up that right to bear arms...
Look, there's lots of things that you could put together in a policy set.
Don't answer like a politician.
No.
Tell us yes or no.
I don't think Australia is ready for the right to bear arms. No.
Would you support it or not? You wouldn't.
If there was a popular movement to support it, I would I would definitely
similar
consider
to
it.
the UAP policy of putting it to the people, and if the people.
Well, I don't see anyone pushing for it right now. But
Morgan.
What have I started? What have I done? Oh my goodness! I started. My goodness!
Right to bear
All right.
arms.
All right. So, okay. So,
Why, you
I'm a reader. I read. I'm of the full understanding that the greatest misuse of firearms in history have been conducted at the hands of government, not by private civilians. I believe that to be a fact. I believe, based on my reading.
Yes or no?
Yes.
You put it to the people.
Well,
right to bear arms.
Well, it's interesting because it's a debate.
Make it short.
No. I just would say that, like the Second Amendment, which is enshrined in the Americans' right, and what was it about? What was the Second Amendment was it about? And so what we get on the media all the time, we say people, horrible incidents with gun violence, but it was there to protect the people from the government. That's what it was there for. And funnily enough, now in this culture, you can actually have that debate. Once upon a time, you could have never even had that debate in Australia, but people are even more willing to listen to why this Second Amendment was there, because we've experienced.
But I guess you're painting a pretty scary picture. We have a bloke next to you who served for 10 years. So in Victoria over the last 2 years, I'm assuming you're in support of the right to bear arms in case the government oversteps. So what?
I can't believe the government's weaponised itself against me, where I'm at a point where I even have to think that way, to be honest.
But then the right to bear arms, so you would have seen an armed population here in Victoria in a time where a lot of Victorians thought
I think
the authority
I think the
overstepped.
police would have thought twice about firing on us with rubber bullets if that was the case, to be quite honest. They would have thought really twice about it, yeah, most definitely.
We are certainly not advocating anything here. This is just a point
No,
of
but that's what it
question.
does, doesn't it? It gives the private citizen some sort of protection.
Former officer, this is an interesting one for you.
So, personally, it's a large change, so I'd be going to a referendum. Me personally, I don't have a problem with open carry, but that's because I feel safe around firearms. I know they don't go off unless I make them go off. But if you can just go down, like a lot of the states in America, if you can just go down and pick one up and buy it, and you've done no training, you've done no that, like...
People often bring America into it, but
Yeah.
I come from, I served in Israel, and I've seen a highly armed population, and you don't have the same sort of thing as, but yes, I understand.
So, for example, even just the difference between being in a city, like somebody in Fitzroy is going to tell you 100% they don't want one, and the vast majority of people are going to live in cities, so I can't see it getting up. But anybody who's rural...
But your position?
Me personally, I'd love to be able to open carry.
Support it.
But that's not. Okay.
So, myself and our party, we advocate for responsible gun ownership, and we'll continue to advocate for that.
Yep.
I don't believe that we have a gun problem in this country.
Yep.
I myself am trained to operate assault rifles and weapon system, much the same as yourselves. However, I don't believe it's for everyone.
Yep.
So I just don't believe there's any need for change from our current legislation.
You don't think there is, so you don't think there should be a right to bear arms?
I just don't think there's any need to change where we currently are. It's not as easy as some people would like to believe to obtain a gun license in this country. It's very difficult.
You don't have a right to.
However, if you can prove yourself responsible,
but you certainly don't have a right to bear arms for self-defence.
No, you don't. Of course not.
So you wouldn't fight for the right of the individual to have a firearm for self-defence.
If the public wished for that, I'd fight for it. And we have.
So you're going back to the UAP.
Well, we have provision for citizens-initiated referenda at One Nation. So therein, the public can raise referenda questions with their political representation directly.
Nick?
Our party doesn't actually have a policy on this
How do you
particular.
feel? You're the one running?
No, that's all right. Look, my personal feelings is no. I remember when Port Arthur happened, I remember when John Howard made a tough call and did the amnesty, and everyone came in and brought their guns back, and, I don't know, maybe I was sort of 20-something at the time. And I look back at the last, I don't know how many years, the best part of 30 years maybe it would have been since that tragic event. What's wrong with our country? Nothing. People walking around shooting people like you see on Fox News in America? No. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
And you reckon Martin Bryant only happened because of gun ownership? You think if there was someone that was so inclined to do that couldn't get hold of a weapon now and do that again? Or you think, I can't get one because
Are there many guns, illegal firearms out in the public at the moment? I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that there's more illegal gun owners, there's more guns, in fact, out on the streets now than there were legal firearms before Port Arthur.
Yeah, but there's also, there's 3D printed guns now. There's slam fire rifles. I'm not actually.
But there's a lot more.
Go through it.
There's a lot of guns out in the community, and we don't see Port Arthur, and I hear that as the argument. But I guess the question was your stance, and we got that. We went off topic. We're going to go. Yeah.
Just one more with that, but. If you look at stats overseas, the vast majority of people with firearms, like the vast majority of deaths, are suicide. So like, it's just then, and so you look at gun ownership, and you've got gun deaths, and they're all self-inflicted. Well, they're not all self-inflicted.
The majority,
but the majority are, and those people are going to do it anyway. Yep. But it's giving guns a dirty word. Do we need them here? Probably not. But at the moment, like, people aren't allowed to keep them, so they've got to store them somewhere else. So the storage centres are getting raided, and then they're taking them from there. The farmers are getting people are raiding their farms. So all the firearms that have been used aren't legal at the moment. And so the difference between...
I guess it's a question when we're all candidates standing for freedom, that is obviously a line. And we're going back to
who's suiciding too? It's young men. It's particularly young men, isn't it?
Yeah, you're going to go into a whole other
emasculation of the culture. But you are. That's where it leads to.
You're right. I understand all of that, and it's a good point.
I just wanted to make a point. Even in societies like the United States, where the right to bear arms exists, many people who choose to bear arms don't use firearms. In fact, the most popular is usually things like non-lethal means like pepper spray and things like this, which I would fully, and I've actually advocated for many times. I think it's a very practical means of self-defence for people who are vulnerable.
All right, we'll go and...
Someone else was there with a gun. Could have they taken Martin Bright now? I mean, this argument can go round and round and round and round in circles, can't it? Ultimately?
Absolutely.
I mean, the question is, what are the major driving factors behind homicide? Is it poverty and inequality, or people's access to firearms? There's many countries out there where they have very high rates of firearm ownership.
We can certainly have this debate all night. I guess the question was simple. Would you support it or not?
You started
To be fair, I think Morgan started it. I just continued it. Damian.
Oh, yeah.
You're an actor. You've been an actor till recently. You've been in the establishment for many years as part of the establishment as an actor. How do we know this is not just a big show for you?
Part of this
crisis actor, I think, is a word they use.
Yeah. As part of an establishment, as an actor can ever really consider themselves. There's plenty of times in between gigs where I was doing other things just from acting, but that's fine. I'll take your point, because what I've seen is what happens as an actor, and you're the mouthpiece, you're the propagandist for globalism, or you're the propagandist for whatever progressive cause is du jour at that particular point in time, and whatever that is. And we saw that now with COVID as well. So how many of us, from professional artists of whatever nature in this country or anywhere in the West, are actually out to question the narrative? None of them, because they're not allowed to be, because they're bought and sold. They're bought and sold. So it's why we see people like Leonardo DiCaprio having exactly the same opinions as someone working in a co-op and La Mama in the back, streets of Carlton.
So your point, essentially, in short, is the fact that you're doing this in itself is the reason why we should trust you, because nobody else who's acting is doing it.
Well, you trust me or not, but I've seen it. I've actually seen it in operation. I know what it is. I've seen it. And it's been required of me at times. And I've found it really difficult at times to sit in green rooms and just go along to get along, because I had 3 children and a wife at that stage, or whatever it was. That pressure is immense. That pressure is immense on all of us, because it's really acute as an actor, as the mouthpiece, but it happens across
mum who's got a young kid who is worried about having a brother to them and then worried about the vaccine if it's going to have any dangers and that sort of stuff. Like, all I could do was look after the people that were working with me, and I wasn't in a position where I could just leave and then take off. Like, as it is, I've realistically got about 4 weeks before I'm just going to have to go and drive a forklift or something, because I've got long service leave that they paid out, so I've got a little way that I can pay for my mortgage, and then I'm just going back to... So I've given up a career in which I could have gone up and been paid quite well and been quite comfy if I just played the game. But instead, I've thrown my hat in the ring to stand up for the people that I've been dealing with for the last 2 years. Like, home invasions didn't stop. People didn't stop killing themselves. You know, kids still weren't missing. Like, I'm still talking to kids that are sitting on cliffs and stuff. Like, all that stuff didn't stop just because COVID happened. I mean, I'm sure you saw the public order response team shooting rubber bullets and stuff at failed actors, and then I'm just kidding.
I thought we were keeping this friendly. Gloves are off. Are we going for it?
Yeah. I'm an extra. I'm not even close to being at your level. You know, and then, you know, so that stuff's going on in the public media, but no one cared about what was happening behind the scenes. Like, law didn't stop everywhere else. All your country coppers and stuff don't even know what happened in Melbourne. They were still out and about chasing horses off roads and doing their job. Like, you know, like, there was still policing to be done. So I was doing my job that you were paying me to do, and I'd sworn an oath to do. So I wasn't there shooting rubber bullets at people protesting, going against what I believed in. I was doing my job at the station. And now that that's over, you know, I've got a brief window and I'm able to actually do something because I've met and spoken to Heston and the other guys in their gang, and I was like, you know what, I actually believe in these guys. And then the fact that Heston said, look, if you want to vote for Victoria against what I'm going against, that's fine, just tell me beforehand so I know, and I can go my own way. So it's like a difference from being a massive party. Yeah, so I looked at getting into politics. I spoke to some other guys that did it. They said what happens is you go there, you speak to your constituents, they tell you what to do, and then you go to your party, you tell them what you want, and then the party goes, that's cool, I need you to sell them this idea. So that wasn't for me, so I didn't want to get into it. And then, I mean, the Lib Dems sound great, and there's some other parties now that sound great that I didn't look that much into, but Heston rang a bell with me, so I was like,
Are you telling me tonight's convinced you to vote for one of the other panel members?
No, but I'm still happy to put these guys down. Like, I won't be putting any other major parties up. I'm still voting for all these dudes. I'm just voting for me first because I'm Bane. But yeah, outside of that.
Mate, One Nation, you're running for the Senate now. I think in the intro you said, and the One Nation's running on the freedom ticket, and I think your terminology, I just looked at it again, was sovereignty of the individual. Is that right?
That's correct.
I guess the question is, when somebody like Pauline Hanson, who's the leader of One Nation, and I'm sure you believe in, or I think you've said you believed in all her policies all the time for the last 20 years, you know, she's stood up to ban the burqa, for example, and I'm not arguing with that policy, but the question that I have is, if you're fighting for freedom and the sovereignty of the individual, how does that reconcile with that policy?
That policy specifically?
That's an example, yeah. Well, that's one example that I could think of with Pauline Hanson.
Well, so sovereignty of the individual obviously encapsulates every individual within the realm of what, as we discussed before, what doesn't impede on the sovereignty of others. And, well, that one in particular impedes on other people's freedom to security. If people don't feel secure in that situation, you know, the same reason we're not allowed to wear motorbike helmets. I ride motorbikes. I'm not allowed to wear my helmet into the service station because, you know, it impeaches on the freedoms and the security of the person working behind the counter.
So you're saying the security, it's not subjective. It's not that I feel
exactly.
You think that it's...
It doesn't matter if you're offended by that. You know, that's your problem that you need to reconcile with yourself. But it encroaches on the security of another individual.
Nick, you essentially are running for a party that I guess most people, and looking at your policies, is almost a one issue party. You might have policies that stretch a little bit, but it's still one issue. And that issue arguably is, I guess, we're at the end of it. So why should anyone bother with your party or you as a candidate now that we're at the end of the pandemic and it's probably the issue that's least in people's minds at the moment, at least the public.
I'm glad you think we're at the end of it. I don't think we are. I can't go back to work. You can't go back to work being a cop if you wanted to. So I think we're far from being out of the woods. I think what they've done, obviously there's an election coming up, so they've taken the reins off a little bit and said, okay, they can go to the footy, let them go to the pub, let them go to a restaurant, let them do this, let them do that. It's giving this much when we need this much. It's putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg, as far as I'm concerned. Our main policy is our health, and we worry about their environment, and we should, and we have policies for that too, and we worry about this, and we worry about that. What about us? Why aren't we worrying about ourselves? If we're not taking care of ourselves, then, there's nothing. And I think that, I'll give the example. So if you're shopping for a new car or a used car, whatever it might be, a couch, a fridge, you're doing your research. You go out and you look at them, you talk to people who know what's going on, you form an opinion. All of a sudden you're considered prudent. Oh, good on you, Nick. You did your homework. But when it comes to pudding, and I think Greg Hunt used the term, the biggest... So, I think we need to take care of ourselves first as human beings and our health. Then, we can deal with, all the other issues that we need to address.
Appreciate it. Just for clarity, so there was 2 comments tonight, one I think of Morgan in the beginning and one now that may get slightly censored when it goes on mainstream platforms so that this whole debate isn't banned, and that will be one of them. Calling it that is going to get you banned no matter who said it. Greg Hunt is a protected species. I used to be a protected species, but that's gone. Now, that comes to the end of those questions. We're going to go into the closing 2 minutes. It was 2 minutes? 2 minutes. 2 minutes per person. Now, I want you to include in the closing, and then we're going to, each one of you can choose to ask a question to another or not, and then we're going to have a beer, because I'm thirsty. But in the 2 minutes, explain to the voter why, out of you, because most of the people watching this are voting all of you guys, but it's about who they're voting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. So tell the voter why they should put you above the others. Who wants to start?
I'll start if you want.
You'll start?
Sure.
There we go. That's confidence we like to see in a leader.
So tonight we've talked about a number of issues, ladies and gentlemen, and the most pressing issues which we face as a nation, as a country, as a people right now is our national debt. Now let's be clear, the national debt is the elephant in the room. No major party is talking about it. No one has a plan to deal with it. Josh Frydenberg's plan for Treasurer is to consider paying it off sometime in about 10 years. That's not a plan. We don't have 10 years to wait. So, like we said before, the national debt is $1 trillion, $1,000 billion, an absolutely huge amount of money. So the UAP is going to put its hand up to deal with that national debt by putting in place a 15% export licence on iron ore. This export licence will pay off our national debt in approximately 20 years and in the process save us from the worst of the interest rates. The next policy for the UAP is obviously we're trying to save you from interest rates because we want to save your family home. So we believe that an interest rate of no more than 3% on all home loans for the next 5 years is going to help you do that because, like I mentioned, we are going to see increased interest rates in the next few years. Now, this is completely constitutional. Section 51, Part 13 of our Constitution right now grants the federal government the power to regulate the banks. So we will do that through legislation as well. So the problems that we are living in right now was created by men and women, and it can be solved by men and women. Now, this is only a temporary measure for 5 years to help you save your home. After that, it will default to the market rate. The next policy which we have is to bring Australian super home. So Australian super, there's about 3.5 trillion of super right now. We're saying bring $1 trillion of that super back home to grow Australia, because right now that super is overseas, in Europe, in America, growing their industries there. It should be here. So the message for all of us is this: if you're happy with all that is being done now, if you believe that Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese really represent your interests, then go ahead and vote for them again. But if for all these reasons that I and everyone else here have mentioned, you believe that I, as a representative of the UAP, is more likely to secure yours and your family's future and take us forward into this next century, then you must vote one UAP. Now, together, we will make a difference. Together, we will stand up. Together, we will create change. Together, we will make a better tomorrow. And together, we will save Australia. Thank you. Vote one UAP.
So, great, but quickly, why above the rest?
Why above the rest? It's our economic policies. That's what it is.
Above all the others here?
Above all the others. And I love these guys. They're all amazing people. But we are best placed to go forward to take this country into the next century.
Who's going next? Hand up.
Yeah. So I'm saying I spoke to a bloke in Shepparton, and he basically told me what my job was. He asked me what the 3 things were, and I was like, yeah, all right, you got me, what are they? And he said, basically my job is to sit in Parliament, which people aren't doing at the moment, and be his ears. My job's to sit there and read the legislation as his eyes and then make a decision based off him. But with the major parties is they've obviously still got to toe a party line, which is why we're trying to get rid of Labor and Liberal. You still got parties that'll have other things. I've spoken to Heston and I told him, look, I'm going to cross the floor if I need to. The thing is we start in the middle, so we're not crossing the floor. We can go either way depending on what we do. I want to work with all these guys. If they're in there, I have to work with everybody. Happy to work with big parties, provided that their legislation makes sense.
Why above these guys?
Because I don't have any affiliations with anyone else, and I can do...
Morgan doesn't have?
Yeah, well, you can vote for Morgan as equal one. But yeah, look, if you're not going to vote for me one, because of something else in a small policy that these other guys, go with them. But put me at least second or third. I'm happy to help and do whatever it is the Victorians want me to do, because that's my job, not other people. But just don't vote for the bigger guys.
Next, who's up?
I'll go. Informed Medical Options Party believe in exactly that, informed medical choice. So what we've gone through in the last 2 years, if you think this can't happen again, if you think there can't be a future pandemic, if you think the WHO, who are encroaching on Australians more and more every day and telling us what to do, can't happen again, think again. If you look at France, for example, France have introduced digital IDs 3 days after being re-elected. We don't want to go down that path where we're scrutinised and followed. Oh, Nick went to the 7-Eleven this morning. Oh, Nick went to the pub. Oh, Nick was at Woolies. We don't want that. We want to be free citizens to go about our business. Obviously, law-abiding citizens to go and do what we want. But we believe in our rights to our body, that these choices, again, I know I said this at the start, but it can't be said enough. We make these decisions with our doctors in private and our families and our loved ones, not go get it or else you're going to lose your job and your life and your family and everything else. So removing all the mandates, getting away from the WHO, basically, putting things out like any future proposals like digital passports and encroaching on our freedom.
Why should they vote one on you above the rest here?
As good as everybody is, and I say this with all due respect, I think we're really more about ourselves most and our health and the decisions that we make about ourselves. That's pretty much the most important.
You're essentially saying my tough question is your answer for this.
I'm saying that as citizens of a democratic country, the most important thing is that we should be able to make our own informed health decisions with our health experts, not be forced to do something. This is not one of these countries where you're forced to do something, go get it or else. This is Australia.
Yeah. So I think in Victoria's public's effort to go out and educate themselves on our political system and representation, they've realised that the majors are very much left-leaning these days and subject to the whims of vocal minorities. we're a one nation. I truly believe that we are the last bastion of true conservatism in this country, and people are starting to realise that. Now, we do have a shared set of values with all the other gentlemen on this panel, and I hold everybody here in great esteem. We're amongst great company. But if you vote for me, what you get is authenticity and transparency to you, the Victorian people, but you also get the weight of my voice in Canberra under the guidance of my colleagues and mentors in Senators Hanson and Roberts. And I think that's invaluable to the Australian people right now. So, yeah, while I might be green, you do get a wealth of experience that comes with me in guidance. Now, we don't have Clive Palmer's money to campaign. All of our candidates are self-funded. We don't have, the propaganda machine of the mainstream media, but what you do get with us is Pauline Hanson and the One Nation Party's sheer passion for the Australian people and the Australian public.
And Rukshan and Avi.
Okay, well, look, for me, I'd say it's about organic leadership, ultimately. Who's best to lead this movement? And it's been a movement, hasn't it? Let's be honest. We met some really harsh times. It was really cruel to start with, really draconian mandates, and the police force were weaponised against us. And then late last year we gathered in hundreds of thousands 4 weekends in a row at the steps of the Parliament, and it was extraordinary. The camaraderie was overwhelming, actually. The amount of people that hugged, the amount of people that cried, tears of joy and elation. And as I say, it was 4 weekends in a row. And where did it get us? We just got admonished. We got ridiculed by the mainstream narrative. They wouldn't even accept that there was as many people as there were, which was the greatest protest movement in the history of the country, including the Vietnam moratorium. So what happens with that movement? Where does that movement go? That movement needs real leadership. And that's why I stood as an independent. God bless these parties, and God bless Clive's money, but Clive sits in Queensland. Pauline too, she sits in Queensland. The AFP is Sydney in its basis, and GAP too, God bless GAP, but that's also in Western Australia. Who was there in Victoria, and who has the maturity and the responsibility to take on this movement and lead this movement? Because who actually understands the issues that are at stake? That's what my appeal would be, because I understand the issues that are at stake, and I don't know it all. I can't just give you simplistic answers. There's no silver bullet. Voting me is not the silver bullet, but it might be a pressure point where we can actually begin to make some real and substantive change. So that's why I would implore you to vote for me in the Senate. Vote 1, Damian Richardson, independent, column B.
Morgan, you ready to go?
Yes, good to go. Awesome stuff. Thanks a lot, Avi and Rukshan, for this great evening. So, reasons to vote for me. Well, first of all, it's up to the voter. It's your choice to make your own determination who you think is the best person for the job. So me, what have I done? Where have I been? I've been out there protesting the government before COVID, calling them out for their corruption. I'm very patriotic. I love my country. I love my fellow Australians. I consider that I've accumulated a debt by simply having the privilege to call myself an Australian, a debt to those that worked hard before us, and I have a responsibility to make this country a better place for our future generations. I myself, well, all of us, we've benefited so greatly from this country. I'm pro-manufacturing. I want us drilling our own oil again. I love our farms. I absolutely detest the government trampling over our freedoms and restricting our capability to live our lives and trade as a country that what we are. And we're filled with great, smart people, and there's been so many bad trade deals over the years with so many different countries that need to be undone. So I'm just hugely passionate. I'm not doing this begrudgingly. I've been working towards this for nearly 10 years now. I consider this is my role in life. I'm eager to go to Canberra. I'm eager to fight for justice for my fellow Australian brothers and sisters, and I'm eager to get in there to start swinging. I mean, we need to take heads off in this place. They've done the wrong thing by us, and I'm happy to read legislation. MCJ report, of course. I've conducted over 170 episodes, helped wake up a lot of people. I'll continue my show, MCJ report, if I'm in office, so I'll read legislation, I'll do all that stuff that other people don't want to do. But ultimately, who you vote for is up to you. This is me, this is who I am, I've got nothing to hide. But if you want a guy like me in Parliament, then vote group R above the line, that's R for Revolution, and let's go and sort this stuff out.
The best for last, is it?
Oh, well, I hope so. The thing that makes the Liberal Democrats unique, I think, in this situation is that we're talking about freedom, and we're a party that's been founded on the principles of liberty. And even though our party was only formed 21 years ago, these principles go back centuries. And so some of the things that I've been talking about tonight are about principles from the Enlightenment, and this is what we've always been fighting for ever since our party was formed. And we were fighting against government overreach and these sort of things well before the pandemic. But I think if people want to look at the actions that we've taken throughout the pandemic, both myself and my colleague Tim Quilty, we've taken a principled response to everything pretty much that's happened ever since we've got elected. As I've said many times, most of the arguments that we have are we adhering to our principles? We don't really have arguments about policy and this sort of thing. We have arguments about whether we're sticking to our principles, because that's what our members expect and that's what our supporters expect. And so we stick to that all the time. So I think that something that's unique is if you look at all of our policies, you'll see that they're totally coherent with our philosophy, and that you can be confident that any other policies that we put forward or actions that we take will also be coherent and in line with that philosophy.
Why above the rest? For that reason? Is that the?
I think that's it. Well, I think that's exactly right. I mean, there's some wonderful people here, and there's some differences. But I think that the thing that makes us unique is the fact that our party was founded on this principle.
Well, firstly, thank you for everyone for participating. This is the point where you guys get to, if you want to, ask another candidate, maximum one candidate, one question. Is anyone interested in asking another candidate a question?
Sure, I'll ask a question.
Oh, I thought I did my job well. Go on.
Question to Mr. David Limbrick. Would you be willing to actively work with other parties, predominantly, I would assume, freedom-friendly minor parties, to achieve beneficial outcomes?
Absolutely, and we already do that since I've been in the Victorian Parliament. There's a process. Like, I think every party has something in common with other parties. The idea is to look for where that overlap is and focus on where you can cooperate, and then do that openly so that you say, here are the things that we agree on, here are the things that we don't agree on, therefore we can cooperate on these things that we do agree on. So we're used to doing that, and we'd be doing that in the future and expect to be doing that as part of a crossbench.
Any other questions?
Sure. Question for Ralph. In your opinion, should freedom-friendly minor parties be dealing with the majors for deals in terms of preferences and things like that?
Look, in my opinion, freedom-friendly minor parties must work with absolutely everyone to ensure that, that we can all work together for the benefit of the Australian people. That's what we need to do. We absolutely need to cooperate where we can. If we can't, we can't. But where we can, if we have mutually agreeable things that we can all agree on, yes, we should all cooperate together.
Is this talking about policy or preferences?
I'm talking about policies in general.
Are you talking about
in regards to preferences, I can speak to that right now. So I'm obviously a candidate for the Senate. I'm the #1 Senate candidate in Victoria. And I can tell you that in Victoria, we are not preferencing any of the major parties above the line. So obviously in the Senate, you need to number 1 through to 6. Our first preference is obviously us, the UAP. Our second one is the Lib Dems. Our third is IMOP. Fourth, One Nation. Fifth, Australian Fed Party. And sixth, Australian Values Party. So that's what we'll be placing down there on our how to vote cards in the Senate, which is where I will be.
But that's not the question, that's not the issue, is it? It's not the Senate that people are talking about. It's marginal seats where dodgy deals are being done to try and accrue power. Is that okay? Because it's a manipulation of the system as it's always been manipulated? Maybe that's fine, but that's the point.
I'll answer that.
Not the Senate.
I'll answer that. So I can't comment specifically on lower house seats because I am in the Senate, but I do live in the electorate of Bruce. Okay, so I do know about the electorate of Bruce, and I will list off right now the order of the preferences in Bruce. 1 UAP, 2 Lib Dems, 3 One Nation, 4 Liberal, 5 Labor, and 6 the Greens. The reason why they're on there in the first place, obviously, as you know, in the lower house, you must by law number every square. If you don't number every square, your vote is thrown into the bin. That's a harsh reality.
I guess the question
of
people
that.
have about UAP at the moment is in not specifically that seat. There are some seats where I understand. I haven't looked at them. You're probably more over it than I where they are preferencing the major parties over some of the...
I've got one here, actually, Anthony Belvey, who's running for Casey, who's really disturbed about it because he's had to do his own preference deal because they preferenced the Liberals third.
You'll have to ask Anthony.
But you can't choose your own seats where it's obviously going to be a clear run. You have to choose the ones that are difficult.
I'll comment on that one.
This is the difficulty, isn't it? Because I talked to him this morning and he's really upset.
You'll have to ask Anthony, and it's a shame that he's not here to answer that question, so I don't know exactly what his order is. I can't comment, but what I can say is when we've looked out at our preferences, we've actually looked at, okay, has this candidate spoken out in support of UAP previously? Have they said positive things in regards to lockdowns or COVID? Would they be willing to cross the floor? Those kind of things. And that's how we've made the decisions on who to preference and in which order, but I can't comment specifically.
Well, he said he went for it because they said put the majors last. And now in his seat, they're putting the Liberals third. That's what they want to do.
I can't comment on his particular seat because I don't know.
I do, because I talked to him this morning.
Who worked out the preferences within...
So the preferences were done by the party.
Cost. I don't think we should be doing deals. My mindset, maybe it's too simple for this political world. Maybe this political world isn't meant for me, but I consider if we can't get our country back without doing deals with the devil, then we may as well die trying. I just see Labor and Liberal as a big problem in this country, and I raised the concern, and obviously everyone's talking about it. I didn't mean to cause any distress to anyone, but if there's a situation where Liberal has been placed above one nation, I'm feeling concerned, and it's probably something that should be spoken about.
Well, there's so many people that are doing preference deals. They're all doing it behind closed doors. All of them are all doing it behind closed doors. I guarantee you, because I've been there. I've been party to it. I've seen it happening. I haven't done any preference deals. I've got one. You vote for me, and then you make up your preferences. But you decide. Now, it may be a fool's errand. It may be a fool's errand, but it's truthful to what the movement stood for and what people expected from us.
But it
so
is
we're going to fall back
important
off.
to remember, under our system, nobody can pick your preferences for you. Everybody, they can only advise.
But it's such a complex system that people look to you. They look to the party they're going to vote for to get them out of that conundrum that they don't know. They don't even know how to vote. So many people don't even, they say, oh, I heard you speak, it was fantastic. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm not in your electorate. Well, actually you are if you're a registered Victorian voter, because I'm running for the Senate. They've got no idea. The system's so gamed for the major parties. And a lot of these players know that, and they know that, and it works to their advantage. And that's a problem. That's a problem moving.
The major parties do have a stranglehold, and we do need to our best to be able to get in the first place, to be able to make the changes. Okay, if we don't get in, we can't make any changes at all.
So the UAP's done it under strategy.
The UAP has looked at who is standing in which seat, as far as I know.
But
so strategy is like someone making a lot of money out of COVID. There's 100 new billionaires as a result of COVID because people strategised around it. So people that made syringes, or people that made packaging to deliver syringes. But there's new millionaires. So where does it become a moral imperative, or where is it a strategy? That's the question.
We'll let him answer.
Look, at the end of the day, in order to make any difference in our country, we need to be elected, okay? And we need to do whatever we can and have the best strategy in place to be elected. If we don't get in, me, Morgan, David, whoever, we can't make any changes at all, and the last 2 years was for nothing. We all pack up and go home and get our little cardboard signs and back in the street, kill the bill once more. Nothing happens.
My line of thinking is that we see stories all the time, and it doesn't matter which country you're dealing with, where some young guy puts his hand up and says, I want to be a candidate, I want to run for office, and then 2 years later he's corrupted and is just like everyone else. So I think that it's imperative that if we're going to have real change in this country, then everything that each and every one of us do in our journey to getting into office must be done authentically, ethically, not in a surreptitious manner. Everything must be open, because once a mindset is developed that, okay, we're going to compromise on A, B and C so we can get to this position, what's next? And that's what I'm concerned about. That's what I've witnessed throughout my studies, studying history and things like that, and I just wanted to put that out there.
Any final comments before we go to the closing here tonight? Thank you, everyone. Do you want to add something? No? Yeah, you did.
I had something in mind and I forgot to say it in my 2-minute thing, so apologies. And I want to hold our politicians accountable. I think we all feel the exact same way. We saw what happened with the commission that was on about, all the deaths and the hotel quarantine, and politicians who stand up and say things like, I don't recall, I don't remember, is not good enough. It shouldn't be, not now, not ever. I know in my job or any job I've ever had, if I stuffed up, there's consequences. Okay, you can't, oh no, I don't remember that. Oh, that didn't happen. Oh, I'm not too sure. That doesn't cut it. So we need to make sure that, our politicians are held accountable and to the right standard.
I think that lack of integrity and accountability is why everybody at this panel is here now.
Absolutely.
I think that's what this is about. The election is about holding them accountable.
Definitely.
In the closing.
Look, I just want to thank you all for coming and agreeing to do this debate with Avi and myself. I'm still an undecided voter here in Victoria, and it's a shame that the public is not exposed to you guys as candidates in the Senate. I think it's so important, functioning democracy, that people who are running for government, particularly to represent the people, particularly after everything that we've been through, are able to express themselves and have their opinions heard, at least by our public broadcaster, the ABC. And I think it's a shame that it's not happening. And today we just saw a wonderful debate, a very civil debate, not like yesterday's debate between the two adults in Canberra, ScoMo and Albo. And I think it just shows just what's out there in the public amongst all of us, and how passionate that every one of you are about the country and the state that you want to represent. So I'm very glad that you've given up your time to do this with Avi and myself.
Thank you to Rukshan. Thank you to the candidates, and thank you to the viewers at home. And guys, these people are not given a platform by the ABC to sometimes contest their ideas, and they do have little differences that we have seen here tonight, and that may be the reason. And hopefully it's helped you decide in which order you're going to vote for these.
I nearly had a platform on the ABC last week, as a matter of fact, because some of my supporters got in touch with Radio ABC Gippsland because they were interviewing other candidates. So why don't you interview Damian Richardson? He's independent for the Senate. I spent a lot of time down in Gippsland talking to them, understanding regional concerns, and they said, OK. So I rang them up and they made an appointment for me to have an interview the very next day with the presenter down there. He must have done some research, and at 7:30 I got a text saying, I'm sorry, we're canvassing that. We're not going to do that anymore. What, you're running a debate about the federal election that's about to appear in 2 weeks' time on the ABC, and you're not doing that anymore. I found that really passing curious. So there you go. There's the reality.
That is the reality, and that's why we've done this tonight. It's up to you guys at home to make sure to spread their voices by spreading this video, sharing it, commenting, and spreading it especially to people that are undecided and people that are not aware of what's happening in our country at the moment. And for those of you that are willing and able to support the work we're doing here tonight, we've certainly done a budget job and we have a good team. Quite a diverse team. I want to point this out. They're all people of colour, that's right. You wouldn't see this at a Greens event. Ausdecides.com. Feel free to support our work here. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Thanks,
You guys don't shut the up. I'm tired. That's
Good luck editing that.
that was it. That's Rukshan's problem.
Well, folks, that was sort of interesting, wasn't it?
Wow, that was pretty fantastic. One more time for President Biden, please. That was really great. I got a promise I will not be going to jail. I'll switch things up now. Let's see how we do this. How's everybody doing tonight? You guys good? Everyone good?
Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, just something else jumped in there, and but anyway, well, that's what those in Victoria. That's some of your independent type people and minor parties. Hope it's hope you got to watch it. Didn't fall asleep like I did. Sorry, folks. But anyway, that's Amos Sewn for 17.1 for the night. Cheers. I'll keep you informed about what's happening in Canberra. I'm off to Canberra tomorrow, and well, I'll do a bit of live streaming probably on Facebook, and I'll upload what I can probably on Sunday or so. Okay. Cheers.